Am I the a-hole for asking my friend to not wear makeup to my wedding? I've been with my fiancé, Derek, for 6 years. We met in college, got engaged 2 years ago, and after a lot of planning, stress, and more spreadsheets than I ever thought I'd make in my life, our wedding was finally 3 weeks away. I want to say up front that I'm not a bridezilla. I really don't think I am. I've been pretty relaxed about most things. Derek's mom wanted a specific centerpiece that I personally found ugly, and I said sure, no problem. My maid of honor wanted a bachelorette trip to Nashville instead of the spa weekend I'd originally imagined, and I said fine, let's go to Nashville. I've compromised on a lot, but this one specific thing, became the biggest argument I've had with anyone in years, and now I'm sitting here genuinely wondering if I'm the bad guy. My best friend's name is Cassie. We've known each other since we were 11 years old. She was one of the first people I called when Derek proposed. She's one of my bridesmaids, and not just any bridesmaid, she's one of my closest people. So when I brought this up with her, I genuinely thought she would understand where I was coming from. I thought she might be a little surprised, maybe ask a few questions, but ultimately get it. I was wrong. Here's the background on Cassie. She is really into makeup. Like, really into it. It's her hobby, her creative outlet, and honestly something she's genuinely talented at. She does these looks on her Instagram that are stunning in a dramatic, editorial kind of way. Heavy contouring, graphic eyeliner, bold lips, the kind of looks that stop you mid-scroll. She loves it, it makes her happy, and I have never once had a problem with that. When we go out together, she does her full face and I do my simple mascara and tinted moisturizer routine and we have a great time. I've always admired how confident she is with it. But my wedding has a specific aesthetic. I spent a long time building a vision for this day. It's soft, romantic, kind of dreamy. Lots of whites and blushes and sage green. The bridesmaid dresses are this delicate dusty rose color. The flowers are garden roses and ranunculus. The venue is an old estate with ivy-covered stone walls and big windows that let in this beautiful natural light. The photographer I hired, who costs more than I'd like to admit, specifically mentioned that her work is based on natural tones and soft, romantic imagery. When I picture the photos from this day, I picture something cohesive. Something that looks and feels like the vision I've been building for 2 years. I want to be honest about what I asked Cassie. I didn't tell her she couldn't wear any makeup. I didn't tell her she had to look plain or washed out or that her face needed to be bare. I asked her if she would consider wearing a more natural look for the day. Something softer than what she usually does. I even offered to have the bridal makeup artist, who is doing my makeup and my mom's makeup, do Cassie's makeup too, at no cost to her, so she could still feel beautiful and put together, just in a way that matched the overall aesthetic of the wedding. I thought that was a reasonable offer. I thought I was being considerate by offering to pay for her makeup and frame it as a gift rather than a demand. I brought it up gently, over coffee, just the two of us, a few weeks before the wedding. I told her how much her friendship meant to me, how happy I was that she was standing up there with me, and then I said something like, I just wanted to talk about the wedding look for the bridesmaids, and I want to be upfront with you because you're one of my best friends. She got quiet pretty quickly. I could see it on her face. That stillness that happens when someone is deciding how to react. I kept talking, probably more than I needed to, filling the silence, explaining the aesthetic, mentioning the photographer and the soft tones and the vision I had. I told her I wasn't saying her makeup style was wrong or bad, I was just hoping for something more cohesive on the day. I offered the makeup artist again. I said I thought she would look absolutely beautiful with a softer look because she has incredible bone structure and gorgeous eyes and honestly doesn't need the heavy makeup to look stunning. That last part did not land the way I meant it. She looked at me and said, so you think I wear too much makeup? I said no, I think she looks amazing always. I was just talking about the wedding specifically. She said, you're asking me to not look like myself on your wedding day. I told her I wasn't asking her to not look like herself, I was asking her to match a vibe, the same way I was asking all the bridesmaids to wear the same dress and carry the same flowers. She said that was completely different and I knew it was different. We went back and forth like that for a little while. It didn't get loud or cruel, it was more like this tense, careful conversation where I could feel us pulling in opposite directions and neither of us wanting to fully say the ugly thing underneath it all. She eventually said she needed to think about it and we ended the coffee somewhat awkwardly and went our separate ways. I went home and told Derek about it. He was sympathetic but also said, and I quote, "You knew she wasn't going to love that." Which, yes, in hindsight, fair. But I didn't think she'd react this strongly. I thought she'd push back a little and then come around. What actually happened was that she texted me 2 days later. Not a call, a text. It said something like, "I've thought about it and I want to say that I hear where you're coming from and I understand it's your wedding. But makeup is a really personal thing for me. It's not just about vanity, it's about how I feel comfortable and confident. I've struggled with my skin for a long time and heavy coverage and doing a full face is genuinely tied to how comfortable I feel in my own skin in front of a camera. I'm not sure I can agree to let someone else do my makeup and not feel like myself in photos I'll see for the rest of my life. I hope you can understand that." I read that text probably 10 times. And I want to be clear, I felt genuinely bad when I read it. I didn't know about her skin, or at least I didn't know the depth of how she felt about it. Cassie has always seemed so confident that I think I made an assumption. I texted back and said I understood and that I appreciated her being honest with me and that I was sorry I didn't realize how personal this was for her. And then I made the mistake of talking to my mom about it. My mom, bless her, is not a subtle person. She heard the story and immediately said, "Well, it's your wedding day, she should respect that." And then, because my mom cannot help herself, she mentioned it to my aunt, who mentioned it to my cousin, who is also friends with one of the other bridesmaids, and within about a week, somehow this private conversation between me and Cassie became a thing that multiple people in the wedding party had opinions about. One of my other bridesmaids, Priya, texted me and said she thought I was being a little controlling and that makeup is an expression of identity and I should let people feel comfortable. She wasn't mean about it, but she clearly had already heard the story through the chain and had formed her opinion. My future sister-in-law, who is not in the wedding but who has opinions about everything, called Derek to say she thought it was a bit much to police how a grown woman does her face. And then the one that really got me was when my maid of honor, Jess, sat me down and said she wanted to be honest with me because she loves me. She said she understood where I was coming from with the aesthetic in the photos, and she knew I wasn't coming from a mean place, but she thought that asking Cassie specifically, and she emphasized specifically, to tone down her look while not making the same request of all the other bridesmaids felt like it was singling her out. She pointed out that 2 of the other bridesmaids also wear a fair amount of makeup and I hadn't said anything to them. That one hit me a little differently. Because she was right, I had only brought it up with Cassie. I had not had this conversation with anyone else. And when I asked myself honestly why, the answer was because Cassie's look is the most dramatic. But Jess was asking whether that meant Cassie was being held to a different standard, and I didn't have a clean answer for that. I went back to Cassie a few days later. I called her this time and I apologized. I told her I hadn't fully understood how personal it was and I was sorry for making her feel like she wasn't enough as she was. I told her she could wear whatever makeup she wanted on my wedding day because having her there mattered more than any photo looking a certain way. She was gracious about it. She said she appreciated the call and that she wasn't angry with me, just hurt. She said she'd been feeling a little like she was too much for a long time and this brought up some of that. We had a good conversation, actually. One of the more honest ones we'd had in a while. And the wedding was 3 weeks ago now. Cassie wore her full face. The dramatic liner, the contoured cheeks, the bold lip in a deep berry color that honestly looked striking against the dusty rose dress. She looked like herself. She looked beautiful. In some of the photos she stands out from the other bridesmaids a little bit. When I first saw those photos, I'll be honest, there was a tiny flicker of that original feeling, that wish for cohesion. But then I looked at her face in those photos and she was smiling so wide and she looked so genuinely happy and so entirely herself. And here's the thing that actually settled it for me. The photographer, the one I'd been so worried about, sent me a preview gallery. And there's this one photo, a candid, of me and Cassie laughing during the cocktail hour. I don't even remember what we were laughing about. But in that photo she looks radiant. Like genuinely, completely radiant. And I look at that photo and I don't think about aesthetic cohesion. I think about 20 years of friendship and the fact that she was there. But I'm still posting this because I want to know what people actually think. Was I wrong to ask in the first place? I've heard from enough people in my life with enough different opinions that I honestly can't tell anymore. I asked my best friend to change her appearance for my wedding and she told me it was tied to something vulnerable for her and I didn't know that going in. I don't think I was coming from a bad place. I think I was coming from a place of wanting my wedding to look a certain way, which feels valid to me, but maybe that doesn't make the ask itself okay. I don't know. I've been going back and forth on it for weeks. I keep landing in slightly different places depending on the day. Some days I think I was just a bride who asked a question and handled the fallout as gracefully as I could. Other days I think about what Jess said, about singling Cassie out, and I feel a genuine pang of guilt. And some days I think about that candid photo and I think none of it matters because she was there and she was happy and so was I. So I guess that's where I'm leaving it. Am I the a-hole? Story 2. I 49 meters need advice on how to apologize to my son 27 meters for kicking him out for being gay. I don't know how to start this. I've typed and deleted the first sentence probably 15 times now. My name is Robert, I'm 49 years old, I live in a mid-sized town in Ohio that most people have never heard of, and 8 years ago I told my son to get out of my house and not come back until he was ready to stop choosing what I then believed was a choice. He was 19 years old. He had just finished his first year of college. He had come home for the summer with a bag full of laundry and what I now understand must have taken an enormous amount of courage, and I responded to that courage by telling him he wasn't welcome in my home. His name is Caleb, he's 27 now. He lives in Portland with his partner, a man named Jesse, who by every account is kind and successful and makes my son happy. I know this not because Caleb tells me, but because his mother, my ex-wife Linda, keeps me loosely informed. Not out of kindness to me, I should be clear. Linda has not had much kindness to spare for me since the night I kicked Caleb out. She keeps me informed, I think, because she believes on some level that information might one day push me to do the thing I should have done years ago. I'm trying to figure out how to do that thing. That's why I'm here. I want to explain where I came from, not to excuse what I did, but because I think context matters when you're trying to understand how a person becomes capable of hurting someone they love that deeply. I grew up in a religious household. Not the gentle, community potluck kind of religious. The kind where certain things were stated as absolute fact from the time you were old enough to understand language. My father was a deacon in our church. My mother taught Sunday school for 30 years. The framework I was handed as a child was rigid and specific and I never once questioned it because questioning it was not something that was done in our house. You accepted what you were taught or you faced consequences that ranged from disappointment to something harder than disappointment. I'm not going to go into the details of my childhood because that's a separate story, but I want you to understand that by the time I was an adult, certain beliefs were not beliefs to me. They were just facts. The sky is blue, the earth orbits the sun, and certain things were wrong, full stop, no discussion. I married Linda when I was 23. She was 21. We were both from similar backgrounds, similar churches, similar frameworks. We had Caleb when I was 22 and Linda was 20. Which means I was still practically a kid myself when he was born, though I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man stepping into his responsibilities, which was the language we used for it. We had a second child, a daughter named Mara, 4 years after Caleb. We went to church every Sunday. I coached Little League. Linda was on the school board for a while. We were exactly what our upbringing had shaped us to be. Caleb was a quiet kid, thoughtful. He liked to read more than most boys I knew, liked art, liked music. He could spend an entire Saturday afternoon in his room with a sketchbook and come out at dinner with these detailed drawings that genuinely impressed me. I remember being proud of that, proud of how creative he was, even while other parts of me were filing away certain observations and choosing not to look at them directly. I think on some level one knew, or at least suspected, for years before he told me. I think most parents do. I just kept redirecting that suspicion into something I could live with, telling myself he was just sensitive, just an artistic kid, just a late bloomer. When he left for college, I felt something that I told myself was normal parental worry but was probably also a specific kind of dread. He was going to be away from home, away from the structure we'd built around him, and I was afraid of who he might become without that structure. I called him every Sunday. I asked about church. He always gave me vague enough answers that I could choose to be satisfied, and I chose to be satisfied because it was easier. He came home the summer after his freshman year on a Thursday evening in June. Linda made his favorite dinner. Mara, who was 15 then, was so happy to have her brother home that she talked non-stop through the entire meal. It was a good evening. Normal, easy. After dinner, Caleb helped me clean up the kitchen and we talked about his classes and his professors and a road trip he'd taken with some friends in the spring. He seemed good, settled in himself in a way that was new. I noticed it and I thought it was just the confidence that comes from getting through your first year of college. He asked if we could talk later, just the two of us. I said sure, come find me when you're ready. I went to watch television and he came in around 9 o'clock and sat down across from me and he had that settled look on his face but also something else underneath it. Something careful. He turned down the volume on the TV without asking, which he never did, and that small gesture made my chest tighten before he'd said a single word. He told me he was gay. He said it clearly and directly. No build-up, no hedging. Just, Dad, I'm gay. I've known for a long time and I needed you to know. He looked at me the whole time he said it. I remember that. He didn't look at the floor. He looked right at me, and his eyes were wet but he wasn't crying, and I could see that he had rehearsed this moment probably 100 times. I don't know exactly what I said in the first few minutes. My memory of it is fragmented in the way that high-stress moments sometimes are. I know my voice got loud. I know I said things about his upbringing, about what we'd taught him, about the church, about choices. I know I used that word, choice, more than once, and I know now how deeply wrong that was, but at the time it was the only framework I had. I know Linda came into the room because she heard my voice and I remember her face when she understood what was happening. She didn't say much right then. She just stood in the doorway with this expression I still can't fully describe. Not surprised, more like something she had been quietly bracing for had finally arrived. The specific moment I need to live with is when I told him to leave. He hadn't yelled at me. He hadn't argued. He had gotten quiet when I started raising my voice, the way he always did since he was little, that particular Caleb stillness that I used to think was stubbornness but was really just him processing. And at some point I said, words I remember with complete clarity because I have heard them in my head almost every day since, I am not going to have this in my house. You can come back when you've decided you want to live right, but until then I need you to go. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly, and he went upstairs and packed a bag, the same bag he'd arrived with 2 days earlier, and he came back down and he said goodbye to Linda, who was crying by then, and he said goodbye to Mara, who didn't fully understand what was happening but who started crying because her mother was crying, and he did not say goodbye to me. He walked past me and out the front door and I heard his car start and I heard him drive away and I stood in my living room and told myself I had done the right thing. Linda didn't speak to me for 3 days. When she finally did, the conversation ended with her telling me that if I did not call Caleb and apologize, she didn't know if she could stay in this marriage. I told her I had acted according to my convictions. She told me my convictions had just cost us our son. We went back and forth like that for weeks, and during those weeks Caleb was sleeping on the couch of a college friend because he had nowhere else to go, which I did not know at the time and which I think about often. Linda and I separated 8 months later. I want to be honest and say the marriage had other problems that had been quietly accumulating for years, but the night I kicked Caleb out broke something between us that we couldn't repair. She filed the following spring. She moved about 40 minutes away, closer to her sister. Mara lived with her during the school year and came to me on weekends, and those weekends were hard in a way I couldn't fully articulate because Mara was angry at me in the specific way that 15-year-old girls are angry, which is silently and completely. Caleb finished college. I know this because Linda told me. He graduated in 4 years, got a degree in graphic design, moved to Portland for a job at a design studio. Linda went to his graduation. Mara went to his graduation. I was not invited, and I understood why I was not invited, and I told myself at the time that I was at peace with that. I was not at peace with that. Here is when things started to shift for me, and I want to be honest about this because I think honesty is the only thing that makes this worth telling. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It wasn't a single conversation or a book I read or a sermon I heard. It was slow and uncomfortable and spread across years. It started with Mara, who as she got older got less silent about her anger and more direct about it. She would say things to me, not cruelly, but plainly, that I didn't have responses to. She would say things like, "Dad, he's your son. He's the same person he always was." She would say, "Do you actually believe that Caleb chose this? Like you think he chose to lose his family?" She wasn't yelling. She was just asking me to think, and I found that I couldn't argue with her the way I could have argued with someone who was being emotional about it. I also started, slowly, to actually know gay people. I know that sounds strange, but in my particular world growing up, gay people were this abstract category. They were what the pastor talked about, they were a concept, they were not people I sat across from at dinner or worked alongside or had normal human conversations with. But as I got older and my world got a little wider, that changed. A man I worked with, a good man, a man I genuinely liked and respected, came out to me one day over lunch like it was just information he was sharing, casual and matter of fact, and I remember sitting there and thinking, this is just a person. This is just a person who happens to be gay, and that has nothing to do with who he is in the ways that I know him. That sounds like such an obvious thing. I'm embarrassed it took me that long. And there were nights, alone in my house, when I would let myself think about Caleb. Really think about him, not about my convictions or my upbringing or what I believed, but about him specifically. About his sketchbooks, about the way he used to fall asleep on the couch reading and I'd come in and put a blanket over him. About the way he'd say, "See you, Dad," when I dropped him off somewhere, casual and easy, like of course we'd see each other again. About the fact that I had a son who by all accounts was living a good life and building a good life and I was not in it. And the reason I was not in it was a decision I had made, and I had made it because of beliefs that were handed to me before I was old enough to examine them, and I had never once examined them, and what did that say about me? I'm 59 now. No, wait, I said 49 at the start. I'm 49. I've had 10 years to sit with this and I'm only now getting to the point where I feel ready to actually try. That in itself tells you something about how deep the conditioning went, and also about what a coward I've been. 10 years is a long time to take to do something you know you need to do. About 6 months ago I called Linda. I don't call Linda often. We're civil, we're functional co-parents to Mara even though Mara is 23 now and doesn't need co-parenting, but we're not close. I called her and I told her I wanted to reach out to Caleb. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "What are you going to say to him?" And I told her I didn't know yet, that I was trying to figure that out. She said, "Robert, whatever you say, mean it. Don't reach out to him to make yourself feel better. Reach out to him because you understand what you did to him." I told her I was trying to get to that place. She said, "Get there before you call him." So I've been getting there. Or trying to. I went to a therapist for the first time in my life, which at 49 felt strange and overdue in equal measure. I've been going for about 5 months now. I'm not going to pretend it's been a transformation. I'm still a person shaped by a particular upbringing and certain things are slow to shift. But I've gotten to a place where I can say clearly, without hedging, that what I did to Caleb was wrong. Not just in the outcome but in the root of it. The belief I acted on was wrong. The idea that who he is something broken or chosen or correctable is wrong. I was handed that idea by people who themselves were handed it, and none of us ever stopped to ask whether it was true. And it cost my son his father during some of the most important years of his life. I have a letter that I've been writing and rewriting for about 3 months. It's currently 4 pages long. My therapist says 4 pages might be too much, that Caleb doesn't need my entire internal journey right now, that what he needs to hear from me is specific and clear and not about me processing myself in front of him. She's probably right. I keep rewriting it and it keeps being too much about me. What I want to say to him, the core of it, is this. That I was wrong, not just in how I handled it but in what I believed. That he is not broken and never was. That the failure was mine, completely mine, and not a failure of love exactly, because I have never stopped loving him, but a failure of understanding and courage and willingness to examine the things I was taught. That I am sorry for the night I told him to leave and for every day since then that I let pass without fixing it. That I understand if he doesn't want a relationship with me, that I'm not reaching out to demand anything from him, but that I needed him to know these things from me directly. What I don't know is whether to send the letter or to call or to ask Linda to ask him if he'd be willing to hear from me. I don't want to contact him out of nowhere and have it be a shock or feel like an invasion. He has a life now, a real built life, and I'm aware that I'm something in his past that he has had to make peace with in my absence. I don't know what I represent to him now. I don't know if there's anger that's still live or whether it's become something quieter, something he's moved through and past. I don't know if Jesse knows the full story or how much of it Caleb has shared with the people in his life. Mara told me, when I told her I was thinking about reaching out, that Caleb had said once, Not recently but a few years ago, that he didn't need an apology from me to be okay. That he had done the work of being okay without one. She said he said it without bitterness, just as a statement of fact. I held that information for a long time. Part of me found it relieving, like it meant he was okay, and part of me found it devastating, like it meant he had already closed the door. I'm posting here because I don't know what to do with any of this, and I'm looking for people who might have perspective I don't have. Particularly if there's anyone who has been in Caleb's position, who had a parent do something like this and then come back years later. I would really like to hear what that was like and what, if anything, you needed to hear. I'm not looking for people to tell me what I did was okay, because it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I'm just trying to figure out how to do the next right thing after a very long time of doing the wrong one. His birthday is in 2 months. I don't know if that's a reason to wait or a reason to move sooner. I don't know if a letter is right or a call or some kind of message through Linda or Mara. I know that I'm afraid of doing it wrong, and I'm aware that my fear of doing it wrong has already cost both of us 8 years, and I don't want it to cost us any more. His name is Caleb. He's 27 years old. He's a graphic designer in Portland. He has a partner named Jesse. And he's my son, and I have not told him I love him and I'm sorry in the same sentence in 8 years, and I need to figure out how to do that before any more time goes by. Story 3. Am I the a-hole for not taking my daughter to school in the mornings, and instead making my wife do it? I'm 38, my wife Jenna is 36, and our daughter Sophie is 9. We've been together for 11 years, married for 10, and for most of that time we've had a pretty set rhythm to our mornings. Or, I guess more accurately, I had a set rhythm to our mornings. I'm the one who wakes up first. I'm the one who gets the coffee started, finds the clean uniform shirt someone forgot to move from the dryer, signs the reading log, checks the weather app, reminds Sophie to brush her teeth, reminds her again because she's standing in the hallway petting the dog instead, and makes sure she actually has her lunchbox in her backpack instead of sitting on the kitchen counter next to the bananas. Jenna has never been a morning person. That's not me taking a shot at her, that's just reality. She says her brain doesn't turn on until after 9. If she has to be up before then, she's miserable. I'm not exactly a Disney princess at 6 a.m. either, but I can function. So for years, I did the school mornings because it was easier than hearing everyone be stressed out before the sun was even up. When Sophie was in preschool, Jenna did part-time photography and some editing work from home. I worked regular office hours at a logistics company downtown. Back then, I'd get Sophie dressed and fed, drop her off, then head straight to work. It wasn't ideal, but preschool was on the way and my boss at the time didn't care if I came in at 8:45 instead of 8:30 as long as I stayed late. Jenna would handle pickup most afternoons, and that felt fair enough. Then COVID happened, then remote work happened, then my company downsized, then I ended up switching jobs twice in 3 years. Eventually I landed where I am now, working as operations manager for a regional medical supply warehouse. Better pay, better benefits, more stability, but my schedule rotates. 2 weeks on early shift, 2 weeks on later shift, 1 week with Saturday coverage every month. It's not glamorous, but it pays the mortgage and keeps us from sweating every grocery bill. For the last year and a half, my early shift starts at 6:30. Which means I'm up at 5 o'clock and out the door by 5:40 because the warehouse is about 40 minutes away if traffic behaves and over an hour if it doesn't. Sophie's school doesn't even open the car line until 7:35. So, on paper, this should have meant Jenna started doing mornings, at least on my early weeks. That is not what happened. What actually happened is that for months I tried to keep doing as much of the morning routine as I physically could before leaving. I'd get Sophie up, lay out her clothes, make her breakfast, pack her lunch, and then Jenna would supposedly just have to do the easy part, which was brush hair, make sure shoes were on, and drive her 10 minutes to school. And somehow, every week, there was still a blow-up. I'd get texts at 7:48 saying, "You didn't tell me Sophie needed poster board today." I'd get, "Why are her leggings all in the wash?" Or, "She says she hates the oatmeal you made and now she won't eat." Or the classic, "Can you call her from work? She won't listen to me." At first I'd respond and try to help. Then I stopped because I was literally on the warehouse floor dealing with staffing or shipment issues and couldn't spend 20 minutes troubleshooting our kitchen from my phone. Jenna would tell me I was acting like her assistant, that I'd set her up to fail, by handling mornings for so long and then expecting her to just know everything. And I do understand there was some truth in that. I had a system. Sophie and I had a rhythm. Jenna wasn't part of it in the same way, and Sophie definitely noticed. Sophie is one of those kids who is sweet and funny and weird in the best way, but if you interrupt her routine, she spirals. Not in a dramatic, movie way. In a very normal, exhausting 9-year-old way. If she thought Tuesdays were waffle days and suddenly it was scrambled eggs, she'd stare at the plate like I'd handed her a dead squirrel. If the blue water bottle was in the dishwasher and I gave her the purple one, she'd ask why everything was changing. Her teacher says she's great at school, but at home she likes predictability. Jenna takes that personally. If Sophie says, "Daddy usually puts my hair in 2 braids," Jenna hears, "You're doing it wrong." If Sophie says, "Daddy lets me finish my cereal first," Jenna hears disrespect. A lot of our fights are really about that, I think. Not the school run itself, but Jenna feeling like she's second string in part of our daughter's life. I've tried to be careful with that. I don't correct her in front of Sophie. I don't swoop in and act like the hero. I tell Sophie, "Mom's got it," and I leave. But if I'm being honest, Sophie does better with me in the mornings, and everybody in this house knows it. Things really started going downhill in January. I was on early shift for 2 straight weeks because one of our supervisors quit and I had to cover. That meant I was out the door before 6 every weekday. Jenna was doing school drop-off every day, and by the end of the first week she was furious. One night, around 10:30, I came downstairs after showering and found her in the kitchen slamming Tupperware lids into a drawer hard enough to crack one. I said, "What's wrong?" She laughed in that way where it isn't funny at all and said, "What's wrong is I'm tired of being the default parent whenever it inconveniences you." That honestly stunned me because I almost laughed from pure disbelief. I said, "The default parent? Jenna, I have done mornings for years." She turned around and said, "Exactly. Years of you deciding how it should all be done, so now when I do it, Sophie acts like I'm some substitute teacher." I remember leaning against the counter and trying so hard not to escalate it. I said, "I'm not deciding anything. I'm at work. You chose a job with this schedule. Because it pays 20 grand more than the last one. So now I get punished for that?" And that was one of those moments where you can almost feel the conversation leave the tracks. Because suddenly we weren't talking about school drop-off. We were talking about years of other stuff. I said, "How exactly are you being punished by driving our daughter to school?" She folded her arms and said, "Because you know I'm not functional in the mornings." I said, "Then go to bed earlier." She just stared at me, and I knew immediately I shouldn't have said it like that, even if I meant it. Jenna tends to stay up late. Sometimes she's editing client photos, sometimes she's scrolling on TikTok with true crime videos playing, sometimes she's online shopping, sometimes she's reorganizing a closet at midnight for no reason a sane person can identify. She calls nighttime her only quiet time. I get that, but she'll go to sleep at 1 o'clock and then say 7 o'clock is impossible. That night she said, "You don't get to tell me when to sleep." And I said, "Then you don't get to tell me I should miss work because you like being awake at 12:45 watching women clean gravestones." She said, "Wow." I said, "I'm serious." She said, "No, you're being an asshole." We both went to bed angry, and I don't think we touched each other for 3 days after that. A couple weeks later, Sophie got a tardy slip. Then another. Then her teacher emailed both of us and gently said she'd noticed Sophie seemed stressed on mornings when she arrived late and asked if there was anything they could do to help. That was humiliating. Not because the teacher was rude, because she wasn't at all, but because it made it official. Our house drama had spilled into school. I brought it up that evening after dinner. Sophie was in the living room building some incredibly elaborate horse stable out of magnetic tiles. I said quietly, "We need to figure this out. She can't keep being late." Jenna didn't even look up from rinsing plates. "Then maybe you should take her." I said, "I can't." "You can if you want to." "No, I actually cannot be at the warehouse and at her school at the same time." Jenna shut the water off and turned to me. "Other fathers manage." I said, "Other fathers aren't on the same schedule as me." "Jenna, what are we doing here? What is the actual solution you want?" She said, "I want you to care that this is hard for me." That took some of the wind out of my sails because it was a different sentence than I expected. Less accusation, more hurt. So I said, "I do care." And she said, Then stop acting like this is some basic task any idiot can handle. I spend every morning getting attitude from Sophie, rushing around because everything in this house is set up around your system, and then I feel like garbage before I've even had coffee. I probably should have just listened. Instead I said, lots of parents do that every day. She gave me this flat, exhausted look and said, I know. That doesn't make me less miserable. That was the first time I kind of understood that for Jenna, it wasn't about fairness in the objective sense. It was about how deeply she dreaded that part of the day. Which I can sympathize with on a human level. But sympathy doesn't magically solve logistics. A month after that, her mom got involved, which somehow made everything 10 times worse. My mother-in-law, Denise, lives 20 minutes away and has strong opinions on every marriage except her own, which ended spectacularly in 2008. She's the kind of person who says, I'm just very direct, as if that absolves every rude thing she says. We were over there for a Sunday dinner, just pasta and salad and garlic bread, and Denise asked Sophie how school was. Sophie, because she is 9 and has no instinct for social self-preservation, said, good, but sometimes mommy gets mad in the car line. The whole table went quiet. Jenna immediately said, Sophie? But Denise was already looking at me like she'd found her villain for the week. I said, it's not like that. Denise said, well, why is Jenna doing mornings by herself if it's causing all this stress? And Jenna, instead of shutting it down, just kept twisting her napkin in her lap and said, because Mark says he has to be at work. That, says, really irritated me. So I said, I do have to be at work. Denise said, your father worked and still managed to get you kids where you needed to go. I said, didn't he also own his own business and make his own hours? Denise gave me a cold smile and said, funny how men always find reasons. At that point I knew nothing good was going to happen if I stayed in my chair, so I got up and started clearing plates. Which apparently made me look guiltier. On the drive home Jenna said I embarrassed her by being defensive. I said, your mother was calling me a deadbeat over Penne. She was not. She absolutely was. She thinks you're not being flexible. I think your mother should not be in our marriage. Jenna just looked out the window and said, that's convenient for you. The thing that really set this whole mess off happened about 3 weeks ago. I was on early shift again. Sophie had Spirit Day and needed to wear green. I laid out her green hoodie before I left. Jenna texted me at 7:31. Where is her hoodie? I texted back. On the dining chair. No answer. At 7:46. There's nothing here. Thanks. At 8:02, while I'm literally on a conference call with our inventory team. She's crying because she wanted the hoodie and now she's late. This is ridiculous. When I got home that evening, Sophie was fine, watching a baking show with the dog curled against her legs. Jenna was still angry. She said, you said it was on the chair. It was. Well, it wasn't there when we needed it. I went into the dining room and the hoodie was hanging on the back of one of the chairs. Visible from space. I just stood there holding it. I didn't say anything for a second because I wanted to make sure I wasn't about to be cruel. Then I walked back into the kitchen and said, it was right there. She said, don't. I said, no, Jenna, seriously, it was right there. She slammed a cabinet and said, do you think I'm stupid? And I said, I think you panic in the mornings and then everything becomes a 5-alarm fire. She said, because I'm doing it alone. And that's when I finally snapped. I said, you are not doing it alone. You are doing one school drop-off. 1. After I have already been awake for 2 hours and at work since before sunrise. Sophie heard us. I know because I looked over and she had gone very still in the living room doorway. The second I saw her face, I felt awful. I lowered my voice, but the damage was done. Jenna saw Sophie too and said, great. Great, Mark. Sophie went back to the couch without saying anything, and the whole house got that horrible thick quiet feeling. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Jenna told me I had no idea how draining emotional labor was. She said I treated school mornings like a simple mechanical task when really it was about managing Sophie's moods, remembering class themes, library day, lunch preferences, the social politics of who was ignoring who on the playground, whether she had a stomachache because she was nervous about math, and all the invisible stuff moms are expected to carry. I told her I wasn't dismissing that, but I also didn't think emotional labor meant I should risk my job by showing up late several times a week because she hated mornings. Then she said the sentence that basically launched us into Aita territory. She said, "You're making me do something you know I struggle with, just because it's easier for you." And I said, "No, I'm making you parent." She started crying. Now, before anyone decides I'm some monster, I didn't say it in a screaming way. I said it tired, flat, but honestly that almost made it worse, because it sounded cold as hell. She cried, and I immediately felt like I'd kicked a puppy. She said, "You really think I don't parent our daughter?" I said, "That's not what I said." "You implied it." I said, "Mornings." "You know what? Fine, fine. If it's so easy, then starting tomorrow, do it yourself." I said, "How?" She said, "Figure it out. Since that's what grown-ups do." That night I barely slept. Not because I was scared of taking Sophie to school. I would take her every single day if I actually could. It was because I realized this wasn't a routine disagreement anymore. Jenna was keeping score in a way I didn't fully understand, and I didn't know how far back the tally went. The next morning, I left for work at 5:40 like always. Jenna didn't speak to me. Sophie came downstairs in mismatched socks and gave me a hug that felt cautious, like she was checking the weather on my mood. I said, "Have a good day, bug." She said, "Okay." At 8:15 Jenna texted, "She got there." Nothing else. That went on for 4 more days. No real conversation unless it was about groceries or whether Sophie's library book had been returned. Then on Friday, Jenna asked if I could be home earlier because she had a late afternoon engagement shoot and wanted to leave by 4. I shifted some stuff around and got home at 3:45. She was in our room curling her hair, and for a minute it felt weirdly normal. Then she said, "By the way, I told my sister what's been going on." I said, "Okay?" "She thinks you're being controlling." I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I said, "Controlling? By going to work?" She said, "By deciding that because you handled mornings a certain way, now I have to do them and deal with the fallout." I said, "Jenna, what exactly are you asking me to do?" She put down the curling iron and said, "Ask your boss to come in later twice a week." I said, "That's not realistic." "Why?" "Because I supervise the opening shift." So it matters if I'm there. You have other supervisors. Not enough, which you know." She turned and looked at me in the mirror. "So your answer is just no?" My answer is I can't promise that. You won't even ask. And that part was true. I hadn't asked. Because in my mind, asking implied this was a reasonable long-term accommodation, and I didn't think it was. I thought it would make me look unreliable in a job I hadn't even been in 2 full years. My boss is decent, but he's still a boss. "Can I roll in late because my wife hates mornings?" is not exactly a strong professional pitch. I said, "If there's an emergency, obviously I'll handle it. But I'm not asking to permanently shift my start time for this." She said, "So Sophie and I just have to deal with it." I said, "You keep saying, deal with it, like I've assigned you trench warfare. It is taking your child to school." She said, very quietly, "It's not just taking her to school." Then she left for her shoot. That evening I called my younger sister, Mallory, because I needed to say all of this out loud to someone who knew me and wouldn't automatically take sides. Mallory is 34, has twin boys, and has the kind of no-nonsense energy of a woman who has never once had the luxury of indulging nonsense. I told her everything while sitting in my car in the driveway because I didn't want Sophie overhearing. Mallory said, "Can I be honest?" I said, "Please." She said, "You're right about the logistics, but you're talking like this is a spreadsheet problem." "It isn't." I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means your wife isn't saying, I physically cannot operate a vehicle at 7:30. She's saying she feels like you built this whole family routine where you are the competent one and she's the chaotic one, and now you're acting annoyed that she can't seamlessly step into the thing you've been controlling for years." That stung because I do think there's some truth there. I like systems. I like things done a certain way. I don't think of myself as controlling, but I can definitely become the default expert in little domestic areas because it's faster than arguing. Mallory kept going, "But also, and I cannot emphasize this enough, lots of parents do stuff they hate every day. So unless Jenna is asking for help because she's genuinely drowning, I don't know what solution she expects." That was kind of exactly the problem. I didn't know either. The next Sunday, Jenna and I finally had a real conversation about it. Not a good one, but a real one. Sophie was at a classmate's birthday party at a trampoline place, and we had 90 minutes alone in the house. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee like two people about to discuss a merger. Jenna said, "I think you like being the better parent in the mornings." I said, "I don't think there's a better parent." She looked at me like she didn't believe me. I said, "Okay, I think there's a parent who's more comfortable in that specific part of the day." She said, "Exactly." I said, "That's not the same as me liking it." She said, "Maybe not consciously. But you get to be the calm one. The one Sophie listens to. The one who knows where everything is." I said, "Because I'm awake enough to think." And then I saw her face and realized I'd done it again. Made it sound like competence was just something she lacked. She said, "Do you have any idea what it feels like to have your own kid subtly prefer the other parent every morning?" That got me quiet, because I do know Sophie reaches for me first in certain situations. Bedtime if she's sad, mornings if she's anxious, homework if she's frustrated. Jenna gets plenty too, don't get me wrong. Jenna is who she wants when she's sick. Jenna is the one who knows all the details about her friends and what color scrunchie Emma traded her at recess. Jenna can make Sophie laugh out of a bad mood faster than I can. But I could hear the insecurity in what she was saying. I said, "I don't encourage that." She said, "You don't have to. It's just there." Then she said something that honestly reframed the whole fight for me. She said, "When you leave in the morning, it's like you hand me a live wire and then act confused when I get shocked." I said, "What does that mean?" She rubbed her forehead and said, "It means Sophie wakes up already wanting you. She knows you're leaving. She gets clingy and difficult with me because I'm not who she wanted that morning. Then I'm trying to get her moving while also feeling like the backup parent. And yes, I know that sounds pathetic, but that's how it feels." That was the most honest thing she'd said about it, and for a minute I actually felt awful in a different way. Less defensive, more sad. I said, "Why didn't you just say that?" She gave this humorless little smile and said, "Because every time I try, you turn it into whose schedule is harder." And she wasn't entirely wrong. We talked for maybe another hour, and underneath all of it was this uglier truth neither of us liked naming. Jenna has been feeling a little lost for a while. Her photography work is inconsistent. Some months she's busy, some months it's dead. Half her clients reschedule, the other half want a full wedding package for the price of a sandwich. Sophie is in school all day now. Jenna has more empty house time than she used to, and I think she thought that would feel freeing, but instead it sometimes just makes her feel untethered. Meanwhile, my job is very concrete. I go somewhere, things happen, I solve problems, I come home tired with a reason for it. I think the school mornings became this symbol for a bigger resentment. She feels like I get to opt in and out based on my job, while her time is assumed to be flexible because she works for herself. And to be fair, society absolutely does that to women all the time. But at the same time, if one parent has to do the thing because the other parent literally has to be somewhere else, I don't know what to call that besides life. The part where I may actually be the asshole happened this week. On Tuesday night, Jenna said she had barely slept and asked if I could call out or go in late Wednesday because she couldn't do another morning. I asked why she hadn't slept, and she said she was anxious and then started editing photos at midnight because she couldn't shut her brain off. I said I was sorry, but no, I couldn't miss work for that. She said, "So that's it?" I said, "Jenna, I can't keep setting myself on fire because you had a bad night." She went dead silent, and I knew the second it left my mouth that it was a terrible choice of words. She said, "That's how you see me?" I said, "No, that's not what I meant." But it didn't matter. She shut down completely. The next morning, she did take Sophie to school. Then she apparently cried in the parked car after drop-off because Sophie told her, "You're nicer when Daddy stays home." I found that out later, and honestly, hearing that made my stomach drop. That night Jenna was on the couch under a blanket, not even pretending to watch the show on TV. She looked wrung out. I sat down and said, "How bad was today?" She stared forward and said, "I'm starting to dread waking up." I said, "Do you mean specifically because of school mornings?" She shrugged. "Partly." I asked if she thought she might be depressed. Not in a weaponized way. Genuinely. Because there have been other signs for months now. Low energy, irritability, sleeping weird hours, getting overwhelmed by simple stuff, crying over things that normally wouldn't knock her down. She got angry immediately. She said, I'm not depressed, I'm unsupported. Maybe those things can both be true. I don't know. I told her I wasn't trying to dismiss her. I just didn't think the answer could be me jeopardizing work every other day. She said I always make it about jeopardy and survival, like everything is dire, when really she's asking me to act like our family matters more than my company. And before people ask, yes, our family matters more than my company. But our mortgage also matters. Our health insurance matters. The braces we'll probably be paying for in 2 years matter. Reality isn't romantic. The reason I'm here asking if I'm the asshole is because yesterday everything boiled over in front of actual people. Sophie had an early release day. Jenna asked if I could do pickup, and I said yes because on late shift weeks that's easy for me. She also asked if we could all go to her friend Talia's house for a little backyard dinner thing that evening. I said sure. Talia and her husband, Ben, are one of those couples we see just often enough that everyone is comfortable but not enough that you hide all your weirdness. There were maybe 8 adults there, a bunch of kids running around with glow sticks, burgers on the grill, the usual suburban chaos. At one point we were standing near the patio table with Talia, Ben, and another couple, and somebody made a joke about school mornings being a war zone. Ben said something about how his wife does all of it because he'd lose the kids by accident if he tried to braid hair before coffee. Jenna laughed, took a sip of wine, and said, must be nice. In my house, Mark decided school drop-off is my problem now. The tone was light, but not really. Everybody did that awkward half-laugh people do when they think a joke might actually be a hostage situation. I said, that's not what happened. Jenna said, isn't it? I said, no, my schedule changed. She said, and you made no effort to adjust. Talia looked like she wanted to dissolve into the herb garden. I said quietly, can we not do this here? And Jenna said, why? You're very confident when it's just me. That got everyone's attention. I probably should have walked away. Instead I said, because this isn't a performance. And she said, no, your performance is pretending you're not choosing work over your family. At that point Ben suddenly became fascinated by his grill tongs. Talia called for one of the kids in a voice that was definitely fake. It was horrible. I said, choosing work? Jenna, I leave for work before sunrise. I'm not out golfing. She said, you could ask for flexibility. I said, and you could go to bed before 1 in the morning. That was the exact wrong thing to say in that setting. I know it. I knew it even as I said it. It sounded petty and humiliating because it was. Jenna's face just changed. She went from angry to ice cold in half a second. She said, wow, okay. Then she put her wine down, went inside to get Sophie, and told her they were leaving. Sophie came out carrying 2 glow sticks and looking confused. I said I'd drive separately, but Jenna said, no, stay. You seem comfortable making a scene. Then she left. Talia texted me 10 minutes later saying, hey, just checking in, no judgment, but maybe go home. So I did. When I got there, Jenna had put Sophie to bed early. I found her in our room folding laundry with this rigid, eerie calm. I said, I'm sorry. She said, for which part? I said, for saying that in front of people. She kept folding and said, you're not sorry you said it. You're sorry people heard it. I said, that's not true. She said, it is. Because you keep saying the quiet part out loud whenever you're angry. That I'm failing at something simple. That if I were more disciplined, or more organized, or less emotional, this wouldn't be a problem. I said, I don't think you're failing. And she gave me this look that basically said, don't insult me by lying badly. Then she said, you know what the worst part is? Sophie is going to remember me as the stressed morning parent and you as the easy one. That one hit me hard because I could suddenly see the future version of our daughter joking at 22 about how mom used to snap in the school line and dad was the calm breakfast guy. And Jenna would laugh along, but it would still hurt. I sat on the edge of the bed and said, what do you want me to do? She said, I want you to stop acting like I'm asking for something ridiculous. I said, I'm not acting. I think asking me to jeopardize my job when you are available is ridiculous. And there it was again. The same wall, her experience on one side, the logistics on the other, and both of us acting like our side was the only real side. She slept in Sophie's room last night. I slept like garbage. This morning I got up, made coffee, packed Sophie's lunch, and left it all on the counter before work like usual. Jenna didn't come downstairs before I left. Around 8:05 I got a text from her that just said, "We made it." No emoji, no punctuation, nothing else. Then around noon my phone buzzed again. It was my mom, which was weird because she usually only calls me if someone's dead or she forgot her Apple ID again. She said, "Did you and Jenna have a fight?" Apparently Jenna had called her. Not to trash me exactly, but enough that my mom got a version of the story. My mom, who is generally pretty fair, said, "I don't think you're wrong that Jenna can take Sophie to school if you're already at work. But I do think if your wife is this upset, there's something deeper going on." Which, yes, obviously, I'm not stupid. I know this isn't really about a 10-minute drive to an elementary school. I'm just stuck on the fact that even if something deeper is going on, the practical problem still exists every weekday morning. I don't know if I'm the asshole because I genuinely cannot tell anymore whether I'm holding a reasonable boundary or hiding behind practicality because it's easier than dealing with my wife's feelings. If I could wave a wand and keep my job exactly as it is while also taking Sophie to school every day, I would. Truly, I love that time with her. I like hearing her weird little thoughts in the car, like whether fish ever get thirsty or if teachers have a secret room where they complain about kids. I like how she asks me to park for a second so she can finish telling me something important about a dream she had. I miss that, but I also resent the way this has turned into me being cast as some selfish husband who dumped parenting on his wife because I don't feel like helping. That part feels incredibly unfair. At the same time, I know I've said some harsh things. Go to bed earlier. I'm making you parent. You could go to bed before 1 in the morning. None of that is exactly husband of the year material. It's the kind of stuff you say when you've been feeling unappreciated for a long time and then it all comes out sideways. And if I'm being brutally honest, there is one ugly little part of me that does feel resentful enough to think, why should I rearrange everything when I already carried this for years because she didn't like mornings? I'm not proud of that thought, but it's there. So now the house is tense. Sophie has definitely picked up on it even though we're trying to act normal, and tomorrow is another school day. Which means tomorrow morning, just like every morning lately, I'll get up in the dark, make breakfast in a quiet kitchen, pack a lunch, kiss my daughter's head, and leave for work while my wife takes over the part we apparently still both think belongs to the other one. Story 4. I saw a friend in the market and I can't stop thinking about how she greeted me. I'm 31 now, and this happened last Saturday, but I honestly haven't had a full night of sleep since. I was at the farmer's market in Maplewood, which is where I live now, just outside Columbus. It's one of those places that tries very hard to feel charming. Brick sidewalks, someone always playing acoustic guitar under the awning near the flower stand, overpriced sourdough, toddlers with blueberries all over their faces, golden retrievers tied to benches like they pay taxes there. I go most Saturdays because my husband Ben works every other weekend at the hospital, and if I stay in the house too long by myself I start doing weird stuff like deep cleaning the pantry or reorganizing the junk drawer while listening to podcasts about people who disappear on hiking trails. So I get coffee, walk around, buy tomatoes that are somehow $6 a pound, and pretend I'm the kind of woman who naturally remembers to buy fresh dill. That morning was pretty normal. I had on leggings, an old Ohio State sweatshirt, no makeup, hair in a claw clip, and I was carrying one of those canvas tote bags that every woman over 28 seems to own. I'd already bought asparagus and a loaf of rosemary bread, and I was standing in line for coffee at this little stand that does honey lavender lattes. I turned because I heard somebody laugh behind me. It wasn't even that the laugh was loud. It was just familiar in this weird, immediate way that bypasses your brain and goes straight into your chest. Like hearing a song you forgot existed and suddenly remembering exactly where you were the first time you heard it. I looked over, and it was Nora. And I know, I saw an old friend in public. Doesn't sound like the kind of thing a person should spiral over for a week, but I swear the second I saw her, it felt like somebody had cracked open a door in my head that I'd spent years trying to keep shut. Nora and I were best friends from the time we were 12 until we were 26. Not casual friends, not, we had lunch once a month and liked each other's Instagram posts, friends. I mean the kind of best friends where people stopped using both your names separately. In high school everybody called us, Nora and Liz, like it was one word. I'm Liz, by the way. We met in 7th grade because my family had just moved to Lancaster from Dayton, and I was sitting alone at lunch wearing a purple hoodie from my old school because most of my clothes were still in boxes. Nora sat down across from me with a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos and said, "You look like you bite people when you're nervous." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Do you?" I said, "No." She shrugged and said, "Okay, good. You can have some Doritos." That was pretty much it. That was how she was. Strange in a way that made everyone either immediately love her or keep their distance. I loved her immediately. She had dark red hair she always chopped off herself in the bathroom sink, and freckles across her nose, and she wore this silver ring on her thumb that had belonged to her grandmother. She was dramatic, loud, funny, the kind of person who could talk to a cashier or a professor or a stray cat in the same exact tone. She made people feel like they were already in the middle of a conversation with her. By 9th grade, I was sleeping at her house at least twice a month. Her mom, Diane, made pancakes for dinner and smoked cigarettes on the porch and once told me, "I'm glad you found each other. That girl of mine needs someone who doesn't encourage every bad idea." Nora yelled from the hallway, "That is not true. Liz encourages like 40% of them." And Diane yelled back, "Exactly my point. Our families got used to us being a pair. When my parents fought, I went to Norris. When Norris' older brother got arrested for the second time and their house was chaos, she came to mine and slept on the trundle bed in my room. We learned to drive together in my dad's beige Taurus. We failed our first college algebra test on the same day and got milkshakes after and decided math was a government experiment. We told each other everything. At least I thought we did. That's probably the part that still stings most, even now. Not what happened, exactly, but how completely I believed there was nothing hidden between us. We went to different colleges, but both in state. I went to Ohio University in Athens for elementary education, and she went to Kent State for graphic design. We talked constantly anyway. Long calls at night, stupid texts during class, pictures of terrible cafeteria food, screenshots of boys saying dumb things. When one of us came home for a weekend, the other one somehow knew within an hour. After college, we both ended up back in Columbus for a while. I taught 3rd grade in Hilliard. She got a design job with a marketing company downtown and then quit after 11 months because her boss called her, "kiddo," one too many times. That was very Nora. She freelanced after that, then worked for a bakery doing branding and social media, then freelanced again. She always landed on her feet somehow. We got our first apartments around the same time. Mine was a boring one-bedroom with beige carpet and terrible water pressure. Hers was in an old converted house in Clintonville with slanted floors and radiators that hissed like angry ghosts. We were over at each other's places constantly. We had keys. We knew where the spare toilet paper was. We knew each other's grocery lists and allergies and the names of people from each other's jobs. She was with her boyfriend Sam for about 4 years during that time. He was a good enough guy in that vague, disappointing way some men are. Nice enough that nobody can point to one horrible thing, but never fully there. He forgot birthdays, never had enough money for his half of weekend plans, wasn't sure about moving in together after 3.5 years, and once told her she was a lot sometimes, in front of other people. I never liked him much. Nora and Sam finally broke up when we were 25, and it was ugly and that pathetic, drawn-out way breakups often are in your 20s. Lots of crying in my kitchen, lots of, I know this sounds insane but I checked whether he watched my Instagram story, lots of me saying things like, "He's not mysterious, he's emotionally lazy." She took it hard, harder than I expected, honestly, because half the time she sounded like she could barely stand him. But I guess when you build your adult life around somebody, even a mediocre somebody, it still knocks the wind out of you when they're gone. That summer, she and I were closer than ever. We spent nearly every weekend together. We went to trivia on Thursdays at this Irish pub near my apartment. We drove to Yellow Springs one Sunday just to walk around and buy candles. We started joking that if neither of us got married by 40, we'd buy a little house with a screened porch and become weird local legends. Then I met Ben. And yes, I know how this sounds already. Girl meets man, friendship changes, nobody handles it right. That's definitely part of it, but not all of it. I met Ben at my cousin April's engagement party. He was her fiance's friend from med school. He was tall, quiet, kind of reserved, and he made this dry little comment about the playlist sounding like someone let a Cole's mannequin DJ a wedding, and I laughed so hard wine came out my nose. He apologized 3 times, handed me a napkin, and then spent the next 2 hours talking to me like I was the only person in the room. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have that big immediate charisma Nora always had, but he listened in a way that felt almost physical, like he was actually taking in what I said instead of waiting for his turn. We started dating a couple weeks later. Nora liked him at first. Or seemed to. She called him surprisingly funny for a man with orthopedic shoes energy, which was her version of approval. The three of us got dinner a few times. We went to a brewery in German Village one night and played giant Jenga on the patio. Ben asked Nora about her design work and actually listened to her answer. She told me afterward, he's annoyingly decent. I can't even make fun of him properly. But sometime that fall, the vibe shifted. It was subtle at first. She'd take longer to answer texts. She'd make little comments when I couldn't do something because I already had plans with Ben. Not huge comments, just enough to make me feel vaguely guilty. Like one Friday she texted, "Want to come over and watch trash TV? I bought wine and those little frozen spanakopita things you like." And I said I couldn't because Ben and I were driving to Cincinnati Saturday morning to see his sister and we wanted an early night. She texted back, "Right. Your very serious adult life." I sent a laughing emoji because I thought she was kidding. She said, "I am joking. Mostly." Another time I was 15 minutes late to meet her for brunch because Ben's car battery had died and I stayed to help him with jumper cables. When I got there, she said, "Good to know the boyfriend emergency hotline outranks me now." Again, smiling, but not really smiling. I tried to be careful. I invited her along to things. I still saw her all the time. I still called her first when something happened at work or when my mom said something weird or when I needed to complain about how one of my students had licked a glue stick. But I could feel her getting sharper around the edges with me. Then there was New Year's Eve. Ben had picked up an overnight shift unexpectedly because another resident had the flu, so our original plan got scrapped. Nora invited me to a party at her friend Cammie's apartment downtown. I said yes. I was honestly excited because it felt like old times. Around 10, Cammie's apartment got so crowded and loud that I could practically feel my social battery evaporating. Nora, on the other hand, was fully in her element. She was wearing this black satin top and gold hoops, and she had people gathered around her in the kitchen telling some story about a disastrous client meeting. Every time I looked over, she was making someone laugh. A little before midnight, Ben texted and said his attending had let him off earlier than expected and asked if I wanted to come over after the ball drop. I said yes, because at that point I'd been standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers for 2 hours and I was one lukewarm vodka soda away from climbing out a window. I went to find Nora to tell her I was heading out after midnight. When I told her, she kind of blinked at me and said, "Seriously?" I said, "Yeah, just for a little bit." She laughed, but it wasn't nice. "Jesus, Liz." I said, "What?" She leaned in closer so people wouldn't hear and said, "You cannot go one holiday without making it about some man." I remember just staring at her because it felt so disproportionate to what was happening. I said, "I came here, didn't I?" She said, "For 3 hours. It's New Year's Eve, not deployment." She rolled her eyes and said, "Forget it. Go." I probably should have stayed and talked it out the next day. Instead I got defensive. I did leave after midnight. Then we spent most of January in that passive-aggressive half-fight territory where nothing is resolved and every conversation has a little shard of glass in it. We eventually made up, or I thought we did. She said she'd been having a hard time and felt like everything was changing. I said I understood. I told her Ben wasn't replacing her, which sounds embarrassingly dramatic written out, but that really was the subtext of all of it. Things smoothed over after that, but they never fully went back to how they were. Then, 6 months later, the actual thing happened. The thing that ended us. I still replay it sometimes and wonder if there was a version of that weekend where everything stayed intact. Ben proposed in July, at Inniswood Metro Gardens, under this ridiculous little gazebo covered in climbing roses. It was sweet and simple and very him. He was nervous enough that he forgot half of what he planned to say. I cried so hard I had mascara on my chin. We went to dinner after and called our families from the parking lot. The next day I took Nora to lunch at a place in Worthington and told her in person because I wanted her to be one of the first people I told. I'd even brought a stupid little bag with macarons because it felt festive. She hugged me immediately when I sat down because she could tell from my face. She squealed, grabbed my hand, looked at the ring, made me tell the whole proposal story twice. She seemed genuinely happy. So happy, actually, that I remember feeling relieved. She said, "Obviously I'm your maid of honor." And I laughed and said, "Obviously. That was the plan. It had always been the plan. We'd been joking about our future weddings since we were 18. For about 2 months, everything was fine. Fun, even. She helped me look at venues. She sent me screenshots of dresses. She made a shared Pinterest board called, "If you choose burlap, I will call the police." It felt normal again. Then my mom got involved. My mother, Linda, is the sort of woman who can turn a small preference into a blood feud in under 10 minutes. She's not evil, just exhausting. Very concerned with appearances, very concerned with what people will think, very attached to hierarchy and tradition and the correct order of things. My older sister Kate and I have always had a complicated relationship with her because Kate is the golden child and I'm the child who means well but can be impulsive, which is my mother's lifelong code for doesn't do what I want. When wedding planning started, my mom suddenly had opinions about everything. The venue wasn't formal enough. The flowers looked wild. The menu needed a chicken option for older people. And, most relevant here, she did not like Nora. Not because Nora had done anything terrible. My mom just never fully approved of her. She thought she was too loud, too opinionated, too performative, whatever that means. She liked friends who said thank you too many times and offered to help clear plates. Nora once told my Uncle Randy at Thanksgiving that his thoughts on student loan debt sounded like they'd been assembled from bumper stickers, and my mother never forgot it. One night, about 5 months before the wedding, my mom and I were finalizing the guest list at her kitchen table. She asked if I'd chosen a maid of honor dress color yet. I said no, but I was leaning toward dark green. Then she said, "I'm surprised you're still having Nora in that role." I said, "Why wouldn't I?" She shrugged in that way she does when she wants to sound casual while launching a missile. "I just think a maid of honor should bring calm to the process." I said, "Nora is fine." My mom said, "Well, I hope so." I should have shut it down harder. Instead I just changed the subject, because by then I was so exhausted by wedding opinions I didn't have the energy to fight every single battle. About a week later, Nora came over to my apartment with Thai takeout and a bottle of Prosecco. We were sitting on the floor surrounded by seating chart printouts, and she casually said, "Your mom hates me, right?" I laughed because it seemed absurdly blunt. "No." She gave me a look. "Liz," I said, "she doesn't hate you. She just doesn't always get you." Nora popped a spring roll into her mouth and said, "That's middle-aged white lady for hates me." I said, "She's being annoying about everything. It's not personal." Then Nora said, "Did she say anything about me being maid of honor?" And I remember feeling this hot little rush of panic because I hadn't told her about that conversation. I said, "Why would you ask that?" She said, "Because when I was at your bridal shower planning lunch, Kate made some joke about how your mother was probably praying for a more traditional maid of honor." The room went very still. I said, "Kate said that?" "Yeah, in that fake jokey way she does when she wants plausible deniability." I didn't know what to say, because now I was in the middle of family politics and best friend feelings and I suddenly realized Nora knew more than I thought she did. She looked at me for a second and then said, very evenly, "Did your mom actually say something?" And here's where I screwed up. Because I should have just been honest. I should have said yes, my mom made a rude comment, and I shut it down, and I'm sorry. Instead I got flustered and defensive and said, "You know how my mom is." Which is such a coward sentence. It basically means yes, but I'd rather not own it. Nora stared at me and said, "So that's a yes." I said, "It wasn't a big thing." And she gave this short laugh that I knew immediately was dangerous. She said, "It's always not a big thing when it's your family." That's not fair. No, what's not fair is me finding out from your sister's little drive-by sarcasm that your mother's been lobbying against me and you didn't even tell me. She wasn't lobbying against you. Liz, stop. I'm serious. She put her cup down and said, "Did she or did she not suggest you pick someone else?" I hesitated for like 2 seconds. Maybe 3, but it was enough. She stood up, and it escalated from there in that awful, unstoppable way where each thing you say is technically about the current conversation, but really it's pulling from 5 years of built-up resentment. She said I never defended her with my family. I said that wasn't true. She said I always wanted her boldness when it benefited me, but distanced myself from it when things got uncomfortable. I said she was making this way bigger than it was. She said of course I thought that, because I'm professionally conflict avoidant. I said, at least I don't make every event about me. And the second I said it, I knew I had crossed a line. Her whole face changed, not angry, exactly, more like something shut behind her eyes. She said, very quietly, wow. I tried to walk it back. That's not what I meant. She laughed once. No, I think it is. Then she grabbed her purse and left. She didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. Didn't yell. Just left. I texted her that night. No response. The next morning I texted again and apologized for what I said. Still nothing. 2 days later she sent me one message. I need some space. That space turned into 2 weeks, then a month. I called. No answer. I emailed. Nothing. Eventually I got one longer text that basically said she had spent too many years accepting a friendship where she was expected to absorb my family's disdain, my selective honesty, and my habit of minimizing anything that hurt her if it inconvenienced me. She said she loved me, but she didn't think she could stand next to me at my wedding and pretend things were fine. I cried so hard when I read it I threw up. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub while Ben rubbed circles on my shoulder and said, I'm so sorry. I asked him if I was a bad person. He said no. He said I'd handled things badly, but that didn't make me bad. At the time, that felt like the most generous distinction in the world. Nora didn't come to the wedding. I changed my maid of honor to my sister Kate, which was its own special hell, and every single wedding event felt like there was a tooth missing. A visible absence. There are whole sections of the day where I can still point to the exact moments she should have been there. Laughing with me while I got my hair done. Fixing my strap in the bathroom. Rolling her eyes during my uncle's speech. Dancing badly to Dancing Queen after 2 glasses of champagne. Instead there was this hollow, formal version of things. Pretty, happy, functional. But not right. After the wedding, I told myself maybe time would soften it. Maybe after a few months we'd be able to talk. Maybe once all the wedding emotion was gone, it would look smaller. It didn't. She moved out of Columbus about a year later. I only knew because I saw on Instagram that she'd posted pictures from Chicago with the caption, New city. Same knees that crack when I stand up. Then a few months after that, her account disappeared, or maybe she blocked me. Could have been either. Life kept happening, which is rude, honestly. Ben finished residency. We moved twice. I changed schools. My dad had a minor heart attack and recovered. My sister got divorced. I had my son, Owen, 2 years ago after a miserable pregnancy where I threw up until month 7 and cried over a mozzarella stick commercial. My world got fuller and smaller at the same time. And I didn't think about Nora every single day. Not even every week, but she was never fully gone, either. It was more like having an old fracture that doesn't hurt constantly, but aches in weird weather. Sometimes something stupid would remind me of her. A jar of Bun Mama and apricot preserves because she always stole mine. Somebody saying, bone apple tea, on purpose. The song, Dog Days Are Over. Yellow rain boots. The smell of clove cigarettes outside a bar. A woman with red hair laughing too loudly in Target. Every once in a while I'd have the urge to reach out. Usually late at night when the house was quiet and nostalgia makes everything seem fixable. But I never did, partly because I thought maybe she'd made it clear enough. Partly because I didn't know if contacting her would be about her feelings at all, or just me trying to relieve my own guilt. Then last Saturday happened. I was standing there in line for coffee, and I heard that laugh, and then I turned, and there she was. She looked older, obviously, but in a way that was strange because she also looked exactly the same. Her hair was shorter now, chin length and a deeper auburn than I remembered. She was wearing a tan coat and jeans and carrying a bunch of tulips wrapped in brown paper. She had those same gold hoops. Same way of standing with one hip slightly cocked like she was ready to leave at any second if the vibe got bad. There was a man next to her holding the hand of a little girl who looked maybe 4. Blonde curls, pink rain boots, tiny denim jacket. The man had a travel mug and one of those exhausted but calm dad faces. Nora was saying something to him when she looked up and saw me. And this is the part one can't stop replaying. Because I expected one of 2 things. Either warmth, like shock and then a smile and, oh my god, Liz, or coldness, like a polite nod from a stranger. What I got was neither. She looked at me and for just half a second, her whole face opened. Recognition, surprise, something almost soft. It was there. I know it was there. Then it disappeared. She smiled. Not fake, exactly, but careful. And she said, "Hi, Liz." That was it. Not, "Oh my god." Not, "How are you?" Not, "It's been forever." Just, "Hi, Liz." The way she said my name nearly took me out at the knees. Because it was so gentle. So measured, like she was greeting someone she had once loved very much and had already made peace with never being close to again. I said, "Nora, hi." I could hear my own voice doing that higher, thinner thing it does when I'm caught off guard. The little girl looked up at me, then at Nora, then hid behind the man's leg. He smiled politely. Nora said, "This is my husband, Caleb, and this is June." My stomach did this weird drop, not because she had a husband and child, obviously that's normal and good, but because I realized how much life of hers I had missed. A husband, a whole child, an entire new last name probably. Years of things I hadn't been there for. I smiled and said hello to both of them, and then I said, "This is so weird." She gave a small laugh. "Yeah, it is." I asked if she lived here now, because my brain was scrambling for neutral territory. She said, "We moved back last year. Caleb's parents are in Westerville, and we wanted to be closer before June started kindergarten." I nodded like that was information I had any right to receive casually. Then she asked, "How are you?" And I said, "Good. Good. Ben and I are in Maplewood now. We have a little boy. He's 2. She smiled in a realer way then. "Of course you do." I have thought about that sentence probably 1,000 times. Of course you do. Not in a mean way. Almost fond, like my having a small son somewhere at home fit into some version of me she had always known. I said, "He's with my husband right now, or else he'd be trying to eat dirt by the flower stand." She laughed, a real laugh this time. Caleb said something about the apple cider donuts selling out early, and Nora turned to answer him, and that tiny domestic moment was so intimate and ordinary it made me feel like an intruder in a life I'd once been central to. Then the coffee line moved. The person behind me edged forward. The guitar guy near the herb stand started playing some slow version of Landslide, because apparently the universe enjoys overdoing it. And Nora looked back at me. This is the part. She touched my arm, very lightly, just above the elbow, and said, "It's really nice to see you." That was the greeting, really. Not just the words, the way she said them, the way her voice dropped a little, the tiny pause before, "really." The fact that it didn't sound fake at all. It sounded true, and somehow that hurt more than if she'd been cold. Because if she'd been cold, I could have told myself she hated me, and that would have been clean. Painful, but clean. Instead, she sounded like someone who had already laid our friendship down somewhere soft and visited the grave often enough that it no longer made her cry. I said, "It's really nice to see you too." And I meant it. God, I meant it. Then June started tugging on Nora's coat sleeve because she wanted to see the dog with the red bandana. Caleb smiled again. Nora gave me this small little nod, and they kept walking. That was it. Maybe 90 seconds total. I got my coffee and then just stood near the honey stand like an idiot for several minutes while people walked around me with bunches of carrots and mason jars of jam. My heart was beating way too hard for what had just objectively been a normal interaction. I almost texted Ben right then, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding unhinged. So I just went home. He was in the kitchen making Owen a peanut butter sandwich cut into stars, because apparently my husband enjoys humiliating me by being a better parent. Owen had yogurt in his eyebrows. Ben looked up and said, "You were gone a while." And I said, "I saw Nora." He actually put the knife down. Wow, that's how little I say her name, by the way. Even now Ben knows immediately what it means when I do. I told him the whole thing while Owen shouted, "Truck, truck, truck," from his booster seat and fed pieces of bread to the dog under the table. Ben listened the way he always does, without rushing to fill silence. When I got to the part about her saying, "It's really nice to see you," I started crying so suddenly and stupidly that I had to turn away and pretend I was wiping my nose because of the cold. Ben said, "Hey." I said, "I know this is ridiculous." "No, it isn't." It was like, "I don't know." She was kind. He nodded. And I said, I almost wish she hadn't been. He understood immediately. Because now you have to wonder. Exactly. If she had been frosty, I could have filed it under consequences. If she had been overwhelmingly warm, maybe that would have opened some door. But kindness with distance is its own special kind of haunting. That night, after Owen went to bed, I kept thinking about little details from the interaction. The tulips, the little girl's pink boots, the way Nora's face changed when she first saw me, the way she introduced me to her husband with no awkwardness, no weird caveat, no visible resentment. Just a person from a different life, acknowledged and placed. I told myself to let it go. Instead, I did something stupid. Not unforgivable, just stupid. I looked her up. Not in a creepy way, at least not by modern standards. I searched her name on Instagram from my old inactive art account because I assumed my main was blocked, or maybe I just couldn't handle checking from there. It took me like 30 seconds to find her. Private account now. Profile picture of her, Caleb, and June in matching knit hats. Bio said she was a designer at some studio in Dublin and that she liked bread and old houses and small, loud women, which I assumed meant her daughter. I stared at that profile picture for so long it became embarrassing. Then I looked at Caleb's account because his wasn't private. There were pictures going back years. Chicago, their wedding in what looked like a little greenhouse venue. June as a newborn in a striped hat. Nora holding a giant loaf of bread like a trophy. Family Christmases. Pumpkin patches, soft ordinary life stuff. Nothing in any of it suggested pain. Or missing me, which is not an accusation. Why would it? People move on, that's what they're supposed to do. But seeing proof of it is still strange. The worst part is that she looked happy in this quiet, grounded way I'd always secretly hoped she'd become. Less frantic, less sharp around the edges. Still unmistakably herself, but steadier. And then, because apparently I like emotional self-harm, I went and found old pictures of us on my laptop. There we were at 19 in sunglasses too big for our faces. At 23 on a road trip to Nashville, eating gas station peaches in a parking lot. At 25 on my apartment floor with takeout cartons and cheap wine. At 26 at my engagement lunch, her hand over her mouth looking at the ring. That one nearly killed me. I stayed up way too late doing all this, and the next morning I was completely useless. Ben took Owen to the park and gently suggested I maybe go for a walk or call my sister or do literally anything besides sit on the couch staring into the middle distance. So I called my sister Kate, which was ironic considering all this. Kate and I are better now than we used to be. Not best friend close, but adult sister close. She knows enough of the Nora story to be dangerous. I told her I'd run into Nora at the market. Kate said, "Oh wow. How was it?" And I said, "Fine." That's the problem. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Do you want the mean answer or the nice answer?" I said, "The real answer." She said, "The real answer is you've carried this around longer than she probably has." That was so instantly irritating that I almost hung up. I said, "Okay, that's definitely the mean answer." Kate laughed. "I'm not saying she never thinks about you. I'm saying you froze her in your mind at the point of loss. She has kept living." I said, "I know that. Do you? Because from what you just described, she sounds like someone who has made peace. And you sound like someone who still wants a different ending." I hated how accurate that felt. She also reminded me, not gently, that I had not exactly covered myself in glory back then. She said, "Mom was awful, and you let her be awful because confrontation makes you feel like your skin is on backward." I said, "Thank you, Kate. Very supportive." She said, "I'm serious. You miss Nora. But part of what you miss is the version of yourself who got to be loved by someone that fiercely without having to fully show up for them in the same way." That one made me go quiet. Because there's truth there too, and I don't like it. Nora was always the more obviously loyal one. The one who would drive across town at midnight. The one who would call out your boyfriend, your mother, your boss, whoever needed it. I loved that about her. I depended on that about her. And maybe I took for granted that she'd keep being there even if I failed smaller tests of courage. I'm not saying I was a terrible friend for 14 years. I know I wasn't. I showed up in 1,000 ways. I held her hand through breakups, bad jobs, family disasters. But the fracture happened at a point where she needed me to stand up clearly and I blurred at the edges instead. I can admit that now. The thing I still can't stop thinking about, though, isn't just guilt. It's how that greeting felt. Because when she said, "Hi, Liz," there was this strange tenderness in it. Not enough to invite anything. Just enough to let me know I hadn't imagined our whole life together. I mattered. Once. Maybe in some way I still do. But in a contained, finished form. Like being handed a beautiful object through glass. If she had looked right through me, maybe I'd have less to obsess over. Instead, I keep replaying her face when she first saw me. That split second before the smile. Like maybe she was hit by all of it too. The sleepovers, the road trips, the fights, the wedding, the loss. Maybe all of that flashed through her too, and then she chose composure. I almost messaged her that evening. I even drafted something in my notes app like a deeply embarrassing Victorian widow. It said, "Seeing you today meant more to me than I could say in a parking lot. I've thought of you often, and I'm sorry for my part in how things ended. You looked happy, and that made me happy too." I did not send it. Because what would that be for? Her? Or me? If she wanted to reopen the door, I think I would have felt it. Maybe not from a 90-second market interaction, but still. There was no invitation there. Just grace. And maybe grace is sometimes all you get. Still, I keep thinking about June. About the fact that Nora has a daughter. A little girl with her mother's bold little stance and serious eyes. I keep thinking about how, in some alternate version of the world where I had been braver and less slippery and more willing to make my mother uncomfortable, I might know the child's birthday. I might have been Aunt Liz. She might know my son. Ben and Caleb might make awkward dad small talk over a grill somewhere while Nora and I stand in a kitchen opening wine. That whole invisible life exists parallel to mine, and I brushed against it for 90 seconds in front of a coffee stand. Yesterday I took Owen to the same market, which I realize sounds either masochistic or insane. Maybe both, but part of me wondered if she might be there again. I told myself it was because Owen likes the musician by the herb stand. Which is true. He dances with his whole torso. She wasn't there. I got apples and a muffin and let Owen pet 3 different dogs. Everything was normal, pleasant, even, but there was this weird hollow under it, like I had gone back to a place where I dropped something important and of course it wasn't still lying there. So now I'm here, writing this out because I don't know what else to do with it. I saw a friend in the market, and she greeted me with more kindness than I deserved and more distance than I was prepared for. Story 5. Am I the a-hole for buying my stepdaughter a traditional Navajo dress for graduation? I'm 42M, my wife Lena is 39, and my stepdaughter Ava is 18. She's graduating high school this spring, and what should have been one of those nice family milestones somehow turned into a whole thing that now has both sides of the family talking about me like I personally ruined graduation season. For context, Ava is Navajo through her mom's side. Lena is Diné, raised between Farmington and her grandmother's place outside Shiprock, and a lot of her family is still in that area. I am very much not Navajo. I'm just a white guy from eastern Arizona who moved to New Mexico in my 20s, stayed, and built a life here. I met Lena when Ava was 8, we got married when she was 9, and I've been in her life ever since. I'm careful about how I describe my role because Reddit gets weird about stepparents, and honestly real life gets weird about them too. I have never tried to replace her dad. Ava has always called me Daniel, never Dad, and I've never pushed that. At the same time, I'm not some guy who just lives in the house and occasionally says hello over dinner. I taught her how to drive. I sat through choir concerts, parent-teacher conferences, urgent care visits, basketball games, and the absolutely brutal years where she only communicated in sighs and one-word answers. I paid for braces when her dad said he'd look into it, and then somehow forgot for 11 months. I've taken off work to pick her up when she was sick, when she got dumped, when she bombed her chemistry test and cried in the parking lot because she thought it meant she was too stupid for college. So no, I'm not her father, but I'm also not nothing. Her biological dad, Travis, is 43. He lives in Rio Rancho now with his wife, Melissa, and their 2 younger kids. He's in Ava's life, but in a very inconsistent, performance-based kind of way. He shows up strongest around anything public. Birthdays if there are photos. Big school events if he can post about them. He likes talking about how proud he is of her, but he is not great with the boring day-to-day parts of raising a kid. He and Lena were never married. Their breakup happened when Ava was little, and from everything I understand, It was one of those relationships that should have ended long before it did. To be fair, Travis isn't evil. He's just selfish in a very exhausting way. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks intention matters more than actual follow-through, that's him. He'll say all the right things, make promises with his whole chest, and then if he doesn't come through, he genuinely seems to think the promise itself should still count for something. Ava has spent a lot of her life adjusting around that. Graduation has been a huge deal in Lena's family since basically forever. Not in the, we need the perfect Pinterest party kind of way. More in the, this means something way. A lot of Lena's relatives didn't get smooth, easy paths through school. Some didn't finish, some went back later, some worked jobs that left them dead tired and still showed up for their kids' promotion ceremonies in folding chairs under gym lights. Achievements get marked, family shows up, photos matter, elders matter, the clothes matter. Ava's grandma, Lena's mom, was especially emotional about school milestones. Her name was Elsie, and she was one of those women who never raised her voice much, but somehow everybody still listened when she talked. The first time I met her, she looked at me for what felt like a full minute before saying, "If you're gonna be here, be steady." That was it. No speech, no welcome, no threat, just that. She ended up being very important to me. Not in a movie way where we had some giant breakthrough scene. It was slower than that. I'd help fix stuff around her place. She'd send us home with leftovers in old butter tubs. She'd ask me to drive her to appointments sometimes because she said I had calmer breaks than Lena. She was the first person on Lena's side of the family who made me feel like maybe I wasn't just being tolerated, maybe I was actually becoming part of the shape of things. When Ava was in 8th grade, Elsie cried at her promotion ceremony. Full tears, trying to dab at them with a tissue she'd already used on her lipstick. She kept saying, "High school next. Then college." Ava was embarrassed and kept telling her, "Grandma, stop, people can see you." Elsie didn't care. A couple years ago, before she got really sick, Elsie started talking about Ava's graduation more and more. She asked what color she liked, whether she wanted velvet, whether she'd wear silver or turquoise, whether she wanted her hair up or down. She talked about getting her a traditional Navajo dress for graduation. Sometimes she talked like she was going to buy it, sometimes like she was going to help arrange it. Once she mentioned an older cousin who did beautiful work and was good with the pleats. Ava would just smile and say, "Grandma, I'm literally a sophomore, relax." Then Elsie got worse. She passed away last fall. That hit Lena hard. It hit Ava in a quieter way that worried me more. Lena is the kind of person who cries openly, cleans aggressively, and calls 3 relatives in one afternoon. Ava went the other direction. She got very still. She kept going to school, kept doing homework, kept acting normal, but something in her softened and folded inward. She started spending more time in Elsie's old bedroom when we visited family. She wore one of her grandma's rings on a chain under her shirt. She stopped correcting people when they mispronounced her middle name because, as she told Lena one night, Grandma was the only one who said it right anyway. So by the time spring rolled around and graduation was actually close, there was already emotion all over it. One Sunday in March, Ava asked if we could get coffee, just me and her. That in itself was unusual, because like most 18-year-olds she normally communicates through the kitchen island while scrolling on her phone. I figured she wanted help with college forms or maybe money for senior stuff. We went to one of those little drive-through places in Farmington where the drinks all have names like Desert Sunrise and Canyon Crush. She got something pink and over-sweet. I got black coffee. We parked near the river trail, and she sat there pulling the paper wrapper off her straw into tiny pieces. Finally she said, "Can I ask you something without you making it weird?" I said, "Depends entirely on what the question is." She rolled her eyes. "I'm serious." "I know. Ask." She stared out the windshield and said, "I still want a graduation dress." I knew immediately what she meant. Okay, I know Mom's gonna say we can figure it out, but that means she's gonna stress about money and then act like she's not stressing, and then Aunt Bernice will get involved, and then somehow everybody's feelings will be involved, and I don't want that. I let her talk. She said, "Grandma kept talking about it, and now if I don't do it, it's gonna feel like one more thing that just disappeared." That line stayed with me. I asked if she'd already talked to Lena. She said no, not really, because every time she brought up graduation clothes her mom got teary and said, your grandma would have loved this. Which, fair enough, but not exactly productive. Then Ava said, very quietly, would you help me get one? I didn't answer right away, mostly because I could hear how careful she was being. Not demanding, not even asking me to buy it, exactly. Just asking for help, the kind of request kids make when they're trying not to feel like a burden. So I said, yeah, of course. What kind of help? She looked at me then and said, probably money help. There it was. I asked if she knew where she wanted to get it from. She did. Apparently one of Lena's cousins had recommended a woman in Gallup named Darlene who made traditional dresses and had done some for graduations and weddings. Ava had screenshots on her phone, measurements written in her notes app, color ideas saved from photos, the whole thing. She had clearly already thought about this a lot. I asked how much we were talking, and she sort of winced and said, more than I have. I said, that's not a number. She showed me the messages. Depending on fabric and details, it was going to be between $700 and $1,100. I won't pretend I didn't blink at that. I did. That's real money. Not impossible money, but enough that you feel it. Ava started apologizing immediately. Never mind. It's okay. I knew it was dumb. I said, hey. I didn't say no. She got quiet. I asked if this was what she really wanted or if she felt like she had to because of family expectations. She said, I want it. I actually want it. I don't want to just wear some random department store dress under my gown and then have everyone talk about how grandma wanted me in a traditional one. That made sense to me. There's a big difference between honoring something and being forced into it. I asked one more question, which was whether she wanted me to help because I was the safest person to ask, or because she genuinely wanted me involved. I know that sounds like therapy language, but with stepkids, you learn to be careful. It matters. She was quiet for a second and then said, both. That one almost got me. I told her we'd do it. She started crying, which she absolutely hates doing in front of anyone, and then she got embarrassed and angry at herself for crying, which is very Ava. She kept wiping at her face and saying, this is stupid. I don't know why I'm doing this. I just sat there and handed her napkins from the glove box. That night I told Lena. I didn't want to go behind her back. I fully expected her to say no or at least that we needed to think about it more. Instead she just covered her mouth and cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just those silent tears that come when someone hits an emotional bruise you didn't realize was still so sore. She said, she asked you? I said yes. Lena sat down at the kitchen table and said, my mom would have been so happy she asked. Then she said something I think is important here. She said, if we do this, we do it right. Not like a costume, not as some surprise for Facebook, not for anyone else's feelings. We do it because Ava wants it, and we go through the right people. That was already my thinking, but hearing her say it made me feel steadier. So the next Saturday, Ava and I drove to Gallup. Lena had to work, and honestly I think Ava preferred it that way because she didn't want the day turning emotional before we even got there. It was one of those bright, windy New Mexico mornings where the sky looks fake because it's too blue. Ava wore sweats and one of my old college hoodies, and she slept for half the drive with her cheek against the window. We stopped for gas and breakfast burritos in Cuba, and then when she was more awake she started showing me the photos she liked. Deep velvet colors, long sleeves, certain pleat styles, woven sash ideas. She knew way more than I did. I mostly listened and asked dumb questions. At one point I said, so if I say something ignorant in there, kick me under the table. She laughed and said, trust me, I will. Darlene's shop was attached to her house. Not fancy at all. There were hanging garment bags, fabric samples, a sewing machine by the window, and 3 half-finished pieces laid across a long table. Darlene herself was probably in her 60s, with reading glasses hanging on a chain and the kind of calm voice that makes you automatically sit down straighter. Ava was nervous at first, but once Darlene started asking her questions, she relaxed. They talked about color, fit, neckline, sleeves, graduation, what jewelry she already had, whether she wanted something simple or more formal. Darlene asked if there was family silver she planned to wear. Ava said she had her grandmother's earrings and maybe one of her rings, but not much else. Darlene nodded like that answered something deeper than the actual question. Then Darlene asked, who's this with you? Ava said, my stepdad. I didn't correct it, even though technically she usually calls me Daniel. Darlene just nodded and said, "Good. You need somebody who'll pay attention to the details." I don't know why that got to me so much, but it did. Ava picked a deep blue velvet. Not navy exactly, darker and richer than that. Darlene held up different shades against her skin until Ava found the one that made her whole face light up. She chose a woven sash in black and silver. Nothing overly flashy, just beautiful. When it came time to put down the deposit, Ava stepped back and looked at me with that careful expression again, like she was already preparing to say it was okay if this was too much. I paid the deposit. Then Darlene said she'd need the rest at pickup and gave Ava instructions about shoes, hemming, and how much room she'd need under the gown. On the drive back, Ava was different. Lighter. She talked more in those 3 hours than she had in the previous week. She told me about a girl in her English class who had somehow made senior assassin into a CIA-level operation, about a teacher who kept crying during attendance because it was the last semester with that class, about how she was excited for college and terrified at the same time. Then, near Bloomfield, she got quiet and said, "Thank you for doing that." I said, "You're welcome." She said, "I know it's a lot." I told her not to worry about it. Then she said, "Can you not tell Travis right now?" There it was. The complication. I asked why. She said, "Because he'll make it weird." I didn't say anything. She went on, "He's already acting like graduation is some kind of custody award. He keeps saying stuff like, 'My little girl is graduating,' which is fine, except he says it like he's been there every morning helping with calculus homework." She leaned her head back and looked at the ceiling of the truck. "And if he knows about the dress, he's gonna act like either he should have been the one to buy it or that you shouldn't have." I asked if she wanted him to know eventually. She said, "Obviously he'll know when I'm wearing it. I just don't want to deal with his feelings before then." That was the only part that gave me real pause. Not because I thought Travis had a right to approve it, but because hidden things in blended families have a way of exploding later. Still, Ava was 18, it was her graduation, and this wasn't some dangerous secret. It was a dress, a meaningful one, yes, but still. I told her I wouldn't go out of my way to tell him. Which apparently was enough to start the countdown to disaster. For about 3 weeks, everything was fine. Darlene sent progress photos to Ava. Lena helped her go through Elsie's jewelry. Aunt Bernice offered to lend her a silver concho belt, but Ava said she wanted to keep it simpler. The whole thing felt peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. Then Travis found out early. I'm still not even sure how. My guess is Melissa saw one of the progress photos on Ava's private Instagram story through one of those weird chains of mutual followers and then showed him. Or maybe one of his cousins heard it from someone. In New Mexico, information travels faster than weather. He called me on a Thursday night while I was cleaning up after dinner. I almost didn't answer because he rarely calls me directly unless something is already sideways. But I picked up, and he didn't even say hello. He goes, "So you bought my daughter a Navajo graduation dress?" The tone told me this was not going to be a calm exchange. I said, "Ava asked me to help her get one." He said, "That's not what I asked." I said, "Then yes." There was this short laugh, the kind people do when they're already angry and trying to make it sound like they're not. He said, "Do you have any idea how out of line that is?" I said, "No, I actually don't." He said, "That's because you don't know your place." That immediately raised my blood pressure. I kept my voice even and said, "My place is helping raise her. Have been for almost 10 years. He said, "You're her mother's husband. You don't get to step into cultural stuff like that. You definitely don't get to do it without talking to me." I said, "Ava is 18. She wanted a graduation dress." Lena knew. Her family knew. It came from a recommendation on Lena's side. Nobody was stepping into anything. He said, "You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted to play hero." Now, I'm not proud of how fast I got irritated, but that one hit a nerve because if anything, the reason I kept quiet was to avoid exactly this sort of territorial garbage. I said, "No, Travis, what I wanted was for Ava to have something that mattered to her. Not everything is a performance." Silence for a second. Then he said, cold as anything, "You made a decision that belonged to her parents." I said, "Her mother was aware. And Ava asked me." He snapped, "She asked because you insert yourself." That one I almost laughed at, just because it's wild to accuse a man of inserting himself into the school pickups, grocery bills, insurance paperwork, and all the unglamorous stuff you couldn't be bothered to do consistently. But I didn't laugh. I said, "You can talk to Ava if you have an issue with what she wanted." He said, "Oh, I plan to." And he hung up. Lena was in the living room and could tell from my face it hadn't been a normal call. When I told her, she closed her eyes and said, "Of course." Ava came downstairs while we were still talking, which I hated because I would have rather kept her out of the immediate stress. But she heard enough to know. She said, "He found out?" I said yes. She just stood there for a second and then said, "I'm not talking to him tonight." Lena said that was fine. Sure enough, Travis started texting her almost immediately. At first it was the fake hurt parent thing. "Why didn't you tell me? Why am I hearing this from other people? Why would you let Daniel do that?" Then it shifted to guilt. "I'm your father. You should have come to me." Then, according to Ava, it became self-pity. "I guess I'm just the last to know about my own daughter's life." Ava showed Lena the texts, not me. I only know because Lena summarized them later. Ava responded with one message. I asked for what I wanted. Mom knew. "Please don't make this about you." That should have ended it. It did not end it. Melissa got involved next, which somehow made it worse. Melissa is one of those women who always sounds composed, which means when she says something rude, she can later claim she was just asking a question. She texted Lena saying she thought it was inappropriate for me to buy such a culturally significant item without including Ava's father, and that it creates the appearance that Daniel is trying to replace Travis in a very public way. The wording alone made me tired. Lena responded more politely than I would have. She said the dress was arranged through Ava's maternal family, made by a Navajo woman, and purchased because Ava requested it. She said nobody was trying to replace anybody and that graduation should be about supporting Ava, not arguing over optics. Melissa sent back, "I understand, but you can see how it looks." That phrase should be illegal. Because from my side, what it looked like was an 18-year-old girl asking a parent figure she trusted for help with something deeply important to her, and getting it. But apparently from Travis and Melissa's side, what it looked like was me stealing a spotlight he had not even bothered to stand under until someone else turned it on. The next few weeks were tense in that specific blended family way where everyone is technically being civil, but every text message feels like it's been edited by a lawyer. Ava picked up the dress with Lena instead of me because by then I think she wanted one uncomplicated part of the process. When they brought it home, Lena made me wait in the kitchen until Ava was ready to come out. I heard them moving around upstairs, a little laughing, then silence, then Lena crying in that muffled way where she was clearly trying not to. When Ava finally came down, I honestly didn't know what to say at first. She looked beautiful, not in a pageant way, not overly styled, just grounded and bright and grown. The blue was exactly right. It made the silver in her grandmother's earrings stand out. Lena had helped her tie the sash properly. Ava kept smoothing the fabric over her hips because she was self-conscious, but it fit her perfectly. I said, "Your grandma would have loved that." Ava looked down and smiled in this sad little way and said, "Yeah." Then she did something that really got me. She turned in a half circle and asked, "Does it look like me?" Not, "Does it look good? Does it look like me?" I said, "Yeah, it does." And I meant it. Graduation day came 2 weeks later. It was one of those bright, windy mornings that make every photo look sharper. Lena had been up since 6. The house smelled like hairspray, coffee, and the bacon I was trying not to burn while half listening to instructions from 3 women at once. Ava's cousin Marisol came over to help with her hair. Lena had laid Elsie's jewelry out on a towel like it was sacred, which honestly it kind of was. Ava came downstairs in leggings and an oversized t-shirt, carrying her dress in a garment bag, looking pale from nerves. She kept saying she wasn't hungry and then stealing bites of toast off my plate. At one point she stood by the sink while Lena adjusted her cap and said, "If anybody starts anything today, I'm leaving." Lena said, without even looking up, "Nobody is starting anything today." I remember thinking, famous last words. Before we left, Ava went into our bedroom where we'd set aside a couple of Elsie's things. She came out wearing one of her grandmother's rings and carrying a small handkerchief Lena said had been Elsie's. She tucked it into the hidden pocket of her gown. That detail wrecked Lena all over again. The ceremony itself was fine. Long, hot, crowded, exactly like every graduation. Kids trying not to trip. Families waving from the wrong section. Grandparents holding phones 6 inches from their faces. At one point the principal mispronounced 3 names in a row and the whole crowd kind of collectively winced. Ava wore the dress under her gown and opened the front enough for photos before and after. Lena's side of the family noticed immediately. Her aunties got emotional. Bernice touched the sleeve and said, "Elsie would have been bragging all over town." Marisol kept taking pictures from every angle. One of Lena's uncles hugged Ava and said something in Navajo that I didn't catch, but Ava started crying a little, so I'm guessing it was meaningful. Travis and Melissa arrived late, which was not surprising. They made it before Ava walked, but just barely. Melissa was carrying a giant bouquet that looked like it belonged at a pageant. Travis had that tight smile he gets when he's trying to seem relaxed and failing. He hugged Ava, kissed the side of her head, and said, "You look beautiful, baby girl." Which was nice. For one brief second I thought maybe everyone would keep it together. Then he stepped back, looked at the dress, and I watched his face change. It wasn't obvious enough that anyone who didn't know him would notice, but I know that look by now. His jaw locked for half a second. He looked at me, then Lena, then back at Ava. He said, "Wow, so this is what you guys went with." Ava, already tense, said, "Yes." Melissa said, smiling too brightly, "It's very dramatic." Lena immediately said, "It's traditional." Melissa said, "Of course. I just meant for graduation." Ava looked like she wanted the earth to open and take all of us. So I stepped in and said, "Hey, let's keep today easy." Travis gave me one of those little nods men do right before being passive-aggressive. He said, "I'm trying to." We got through the ceremony. Ava graduated. We cheered. I took about 100 pictures. Travis got his pictures too. For a while it was manageable. The problem came afterward at Lena's sister's house, where we had food for family. Nothing huge, just trays of enchiladas, fry bread, fruit, sheet cake, folding tables in the backyard, that kind of thing. People were relaxed. Kids were running around. Someone had an old speaker playing softly. Ava had finally unclenched enough to laugh. Then Travis cornered me by the side gate. No yelling at first. He kept his voice low, which somehow made it worse. He said, "You happy?" I said, "About what?" He gave this short look around the yard and said, "About everybody seeing you as the big man who came through." I said, "I'm not doing this today." He said, "You already did it today. You knew exactly how this would look." I said, "You mean your daughter in a dress she wanted?" He said, "My daughter in a dress you bought so everybody would think you're the one who matters." At that point I was done pretending this was about cultural respect or proper boundaries. It was ego. Straight ego. I said, "If you're upset because she didn't ask you, that's between you and Ava. Don't put that on me." He stepped closer and said, "You should have told me no." I said, "Honestly, no. I shouldn't have." He said, "Because you're not her dad." And I said, "No, I'm not. But I'm the one she asked." That was the line that really set him off. He said, louder now, "Yeah, because you buy loyalty." A couple people definitely heard that. I said, "That's a hell of a thing to say at your daughter's graduation party." He said, "You think throwing money around makes you family?" Before I could answer, Ava was suddenly there. I still don't know how much she heard, but enough. She looked at Travis and said, "Stop." He immediately did that wounded parent pivot. "Ava, honey, the adults are talking." She said, "No, they're not. You're being rude to Daniel because I asked him for help and you're embarrassed." That landed like a brick. Everything got very still around us in that way family gatherings do when everyone is pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Travis said, "Embarrassed? I'm your father." Ava said, "Then act like it without making everything a competition." Melissa appeared beside him out of nowhere and said, "Ava, that's enough." Ava looked at her and said, "No, it's actually not enough." That was maybe the most 18-year-old sentence she's ever said, and under different circumstances I might have laughed. Lena got there then, along with Bernice and one of Travis's cousins. Suddenly there were too many people and too many feelings. Melissa started saying this whole thing about how disrespectful it was for me to insert myself into a deeply personal and cultural moment. Bernice snapped back that nobody inserted themselves anywhere. Ava asked for what she wanted, and at least someone showed up for her without needing credit. Travis told Bernice to stay out of it. Bernice, who has never stayed out of anything in her life, told him to make her. It was chaos, but quiet chaos, the worst kind. Angry whisper yelling. People trying to pull each other back. Kids being ushered inside, Lena telling everyone to stop ruining the day. Ava standing in the middle of it looking like she wanted to peel off her own skin and disappear. Finally Ava said, very loudly, if anyone says one more thing about my dress, I'm taking it off and going home. That shut everybody up. Travis left about 15 minutes later. Melissa left with him. They took the bouquet they'd brought, which somehow felt on brand. I wish that had been the end of it. Instead, over the next 2 days, the aftermath spread all over the family group texts and Facebook like a grease fire. Travis's sister posted some vague status about some stepparents not knowing boundaries. Melissa's friend, who has met Ava maybe twice, commented something about appropriating important traditions to score points. One of Lena's cousins responded publicly that the dress was literally made by a Navajo seamstress for a Navajo girl at her own request, and maybe people should worry less about optics and more about why the kid didn't feel comfortable asking her father. Then Travis called me again. I let it go to voicemail this time. He left a message saying I owed him an apology, man to man, for undermining him and that if I had any decency I'd admit I overstepped. He also said, and this is the part that really stunned me, that I should have offered him the chance to reimburse me if Ava insisted on getting the dress, because that would have been the respectful thing. That is such a specific, absurd level of control that I actually played the voicemail twice just to make sure I heard it right. So basically he wanted me to tell his daughter no, or else front the money quietly and then transfer the symbolic fatherhood back to him by invoice. No, but the reason I'm even questioning myself is because a few people, including one of my own coworkers, have said some version of, I get why he'd feel weird. And sure, I do get that. If your daughter is wearing something meaningful at graduation and another man paid for it, I can understand that stinging. I'm not a robot. I understand pride. I understand complicated feelings around blended families. What I don't understand is why his feelings should have mattered more than hers. That's the part one keep coming back to. Because if this had been me deciding on my own to surprise Ava with a traditional dress as some grand gesture, I would fully agree that would be weird. If I had bypassed Lena's family, bought something random online, and turned it into a look how supportive I am moment, then yes, that would be gross. If Ava had seemed uncomfortable even once, I would have backed off immediately. But none of that is what happened. She asked me. Her mother knew. Her maternal family was involved. The dress came from someone they trusted. It was worn by a Navajo girl who wanted to honor her grandmother at her own graduation. The only person whose ego got bruised was the man who did not get to be the hero in the story he had mostly not helped write. Ava has mostly gone quiet about it now. Not upset with us, just tired. She posted a few graduation pictures, including one of her in the dress with Lena and another with her aunties. She did not post any with Travis, which I'm sure added another layer to his suffering. He has apparently been telling people I alienated her from him, which would honestly be impressive considering all I really did was answer when she asked for help. A few nights ago, I found Ava in the kitchen getting water after midnight. She still had one of her grandma's rings on. I asked if she was okay. She leaned against the counter and said, "I'm sorry he made it into a thing." I told her none of it was her fault. She said, "He keeps acting like the dress was about him losing something." I said, "Was it?" She thought for a second and then said, "Maybe. But not to you." Then she took her water and went back upstairs. That was about the cleanest summary anyone has given of the whole mess. Lena is furious on my behalf, which I appreciate, but she's also carrying her own guilt because she knows some of this goes back years, to the way she tried too hard to keep peace with Travis for Ava's sake. Bernice wants to set the record straight, publicly, which absolutely would not help. My mother, who lives in Prescott and understands exactly 30% of the family dynamics here, said, "Well honey, sometimes doing the right thing makes people mad," which is true but not especially useful. I keep replaying it because that's what I do when something goes sideways. I go through the sequence and look for the point where I should have made a different call. Should I have told Travis as a courtesy, even knowing he probably would have objected? Should I have told Ava no and said it had to come from her parents only? Should I have offered to split it with him, even though that would have turned her request into some weird male negotiation over her head? None of those options feel better to me than what actually happened. And maybe that's my answer. But I also know being a stepparent means there are some lines you can cross without meaning to. Even after years, even when you love the kid, even when the kid loves you back in whatever complicated, non-movie way stepkids do, there are still roles and histories and bruised egos and invisible tripwires everywhere. I try hard to respect that. I have spent almost a decade trying to respect that. I just didn't think helping my stepdaughter get the graduation dress she wanted, from her own culture, through her own family's connections, after her grandmother had talked about it for years, would become the hill anyone chose to die on. But apparently it is. Now Travis wants an apology, Melissa thinks I created confusion around family roles, and at least 3 people on Facebook who have never paid one electric bill in Ava's life seem to think I staged the whole thing for attention. Meanwhile, the dress is hanging in Ava's closet in a zippered bag. Every now and then when the door is open, I can see that deep blue velvet through the plastic. And when I do, I don't think about Travis or Facebook or who looked like what. I think about Ava in my truck, pulling apart a paper straw wrapper with shaking hands, asking me if I'd help. Story 6. I-25F took my avoidant partner's 28M words literally and it started a fight. I'm 25F, my boyfriend Noah is 28M, and we've been together for a little over 2 years. We live in Columbus, Indiana, this second-floor apartment over a dentist's office that always smells faintly like mint and printer paper, and for the most part our relationship looks normal from the outside. We split groceries, we watch bad reality TV together, we argue about whose turn it is to take the recycling down, we have a running joke about the weird squirrel on our balcony that acts like he pays rent. So when I try to explain what actually happened, I feel like I sound dramatic. Because nothing technically huge happened. Nobody cheated, nobody screamed in public, nobody threw anything. I just took what my boyfriend said at face value, acted accordingly, and apparently that was somehow the wrong thing to do. Noah is one of those people who seems very calm until you know him well enough to realize he's not calm, he's guarded. He's thoughtful, funny, very competent, and extremely good at handling practical things. If the car makes a weird noise, he's already on Reddit reading 3 threads about it before I've even found my shoes. If the sink leaks, he has a YouTube tutorial queued up and a wrench in his hand. If I'm sick, he'll bring me Gatorade, soup, my heating pad, medicine, and remind me when I last took Tylenol. He shows up hard in that kind of love. Where things get weird is emotions. His family is very Midwestern in that polite, repressed, we don't need to discuss every little thing way. His dad, Ron, is retired Air Force and seems physically uncomfortable around vulnerability. His mom, Denise, is nice but has this habit of smoothing over everything with cheerful nonsense. If someone's upset, she starts asking if anyone wants pie. Noah and his younger sister Claire both learned early that the easiest way to survive their house was to be low maintenance. I didn't really clock how deep that went at first because he's not cold exactly. He's affectionate in daily life. He kisses my forehead when he leaves for work. He reaches for my hand automatically in parking lots. He remembers tiny random things I say, like my favorite popsicle flavor or the name of the teacher I hated in 7th grade. So for a long time I thought people were overusing the word avoidant. I thought maybe he just wasn't a big talker. Then we started getting more serious, and suddenly any conversation with even a tiny chance of conflict felt like I was trying to coax a deer out of the woods. If I said, "Hey, when you went quiet after dinner, were you upset about something?" he'd say, "No, I'm fine." If I said, "Okay, but you seemed off," he'd say, "I said I'm fine." If I said, "I'm not trying to accuse you, I just want to understand," he'd sigh like I'd asked him to explain quantum physics. And if I pushed harder, because I am unfortunately the kind of person who does push harder when I feel distance, he'd get this flat, closed expression and say something like, "I don't want to do this right now." That line became a whole thing between us. I don't want to do this right now. It could mean he was tired, annoyed, overwhelmed, embarrassed, genuinely not ready, or just didn't feel like talking. Same sentence, 5 different meanings, no further information. I'm not perfect in this dynamic either. I grew up in a house where everything was discussed loudly and immediately, so silence makes me anxious. My mom would process every emotion out loud in real time. My dad would deny being upset while very obviously being upset, which meant you had to become a little detective just to get through dinner. So when Noah goes blank and tells me nothing is wrong, my nervous system does not hear, "Give him time." It hears, something is wrong and you're supposed to figure it out alone. We've had versions of the same fight probably 20 times. I ask what's wrong. He says nothing. I don't believe him because something is clearly wrong. He feels cornered. I feel shut out. Then somehow we're both mad and also both convinced the other person is creating the problem. The specific fight this post is about started over something so stupid I almost don't want to write it out. It was a Wednesday night in February. Freezing rain all day, that miserable gray slush everywhere, one of those evenings where the city just looks tired. I work in donor relations for a nonprofit, which sounds nicer than it feels when you're on your 7th polite email of the day trying to convince someone that yes, recurring gifts really do help. Noah works in IT for a logistics company and had been in the office all week because they were rolling out some new system everybody apparently hated. I got home around 6:30 carrying Thai takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. He was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter in his work clothes with his laptop open and that look on his face that means he's technically home but mentally still trapped inside Outlook. I kissed him on the cheek and said, "You look thrilled to be alive." He gave me this half smile and said, "Long day." I said, "Same. I brought pad CEU." He said, "You're my hero." All normal. We ate in the living room with the coffee table pulled close and some random House Hunters episode playing in the background. He was quieter than usual, but not in a dramatic way. Just not really engaging. I asked a couple work questions, he gave short answers. I told him one of my coworkers had accidentally sent a donor an email draft with track changes still visible and he actually laughed at that. Then after dinner he took our containers to the kitchen and just sort of stayed there, standing at the sink staring out the dark window. I could feel it immediately. That shift. It's hard to explain if you haven't lived with someone like this, but the whole room changes. Nothing visible happens. It just feels like they've moved 3 steps further away without actually moving. So I went into the kitchen and said, lightly, "You okay?" He was rinsing a fork. "Yeah." I leaned against the counter. "You seem kind of off." He didn't turn around. "Just tired." Normally that would have been enough. But there was something in his voice that made me think there was more to it. Not anger exactly, more like he was holding something in place. I said, "Did something happen at work?" He shrugged. "Same nonsense." Okay, that should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it because then he added, "I'm fine, Emma." And the way he said my name did it. That calm, clipped way that means he's already irritated. So now my brain is going, "Okay, you are not fine." I said, "I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking because you seem upset." He dried the fork, put it down, and finally looked at me. I said I'm fine. There was this tiny pause where I knew I had 2 choices. Drop it, or continue. Sensible people will say drop it. Unfortunately, I am not always a sensible person when I feel like I'm being managed instead of answered. So I said, "You always say that when you don't want to talk." He exhaled through his nose like I'd already exhausted him. "No, I say that when I'm fine." I crossed my arms. "Then why are you being weird?" That was not a helpful phrase, but it was already out there. He looked away and said, "Can we not do this?" And there it was. The line. The famous line. Usually when he says that, I argue about it. I say things like, "Doing what?" or "Having a conversation," or "So I'm just supposed to ignore it?" I'm not proud of that. It's part defensiveness, part panic. But that night, for whatever reason, I was tired too. Like genuinely tired, not in the mood to drag him through another conversation he clearly didn't want. I had a headache coming on and wet socks from stepping in slush outside the apartment and my period was due the next day, which always makes me feel like I'm wearing my nerves on the outside of my skin. So instead of pushing, I just said, "Okay." And I went into the bedroom. Not in a dramatic stomp-off way. I literally just took him at his word. He didn't want to do this, so I was not going to do this. I changed into sweatpants, washed my face, got in bed with my book, and turned on the little lamp on my side. That was it. About 10 minutes later he came into the bedroom and stopped in the doorway. He looked surprised to find me settled in. Which already annoyed me, because what exactly had he expected? That I'd hover in the kitchen waiting for him to feel like explaining himself? He said, "You're going to bed?" I said, "I'm reading." He stood there for a second. Okay. Then he went into the bathroom, showered, came back out, got dressed, and climbed into bed on his side. I kept reading. He picked up his phone. We barely spoke. After maybe 15 minutes he said, "So we're not talking?" I looked up from my book. "You said you didn't want to do this." He stared at me. I meant I didn't want to have an argument. I said, "Okay." I wasn't arguing. His expression changed immediately, that tight jaw thing. "Emma." I put my bookmark in the page and turned the lamp lower. "Noah, I asked if you were okay. You said you were fine, and then you said you didn't want to do this. So I stopped." He sat up against the headboard. "Yeah, and now you're doing this weird passive-aggressive silence thing." I actually laughed because I was so thrown by that. "I'm sorry, what? You're acting like I told you to leave me alone all night." "You did, basically." "I didn't say that. You said, 'Can we not do this?' So I said okay." He rubbed both hands over his face. Jesus Christ. Now I was getting mad. "No, don't do that. Don't act like I'm crazy for literally listening to you." He said, "You know that's not what I meant." And that right there is the whole problem. Because no, I didn't know. I never know. I'm always supposed to infer the softer meaning beneath the harder words, and if I guess wrong somehow I'm the unreasonable one. I said, "Then maybe say what you mean." He just stared at me like I'd insulted him. Then he said, "I'm not doing this." I said, "Okay," and turned the lamp off. That was apparently the wrong move too, because he threw the blanket back, got out of bed, and went to sleep on the couch. The next morning was icy. Not weather-wise, though that too. I mean between us. I got up first, showered, got dressed, fed the cat, made coffee. He came into the kitchen in sweats while I was packing my lunch. His hair was sticking up in the back and normally I would have found that endearing. Instead we just did that awful polite thing people do when they're mad and pretending not to be. He said, "Morning." I said, "Morning." He poured coffee, drank half of it standing up, and then said, "I'm leaving early." I said, "Okay." He waited like he wanted me to say more. I didn't. He grabbed his keys and left. Around 10, my best friend Talia texted me asking if I still wanted to do brunch Saturday. I ended up calling her on my lunch break and blurting the whole thing out while sitting in my car with the heat running. Talia has known me since freshman year of college, and she knows Noah well enough to be fair but not so well that she automatically takes his side. When I explained it, she was quiet for a second and then said, "Honestly, I kind of get why you snapped." I didn't even snap. That's the dumbest part. I did exactly what he asked. Which for him probably felt like punishment. That's insane. I know. But you know his thing. He wants space without it feeling like distance. I pulled a packet of oyster crackers apart just to have something to do with my hands. "That makes no sense." "Yeah," she said. "That's why it's a pattern." And that got under my skin because she was right. It was a pattern. A ridiculously specific pattern where Noah wanted me to understand his discomfort, respond gently to it, and somehow still stay emotionally available in exactly the correct amount. Not too much, because then I'm pushing. Not too little, because then I'm cold. When I got home that evening, he was already there again. Different energy this time. Not shut down exactly. More restless. He was chopping vegetables too hard for a stir fry and had music on louder than he normally likes it. I set my bag down and said, "Hey." He said, "Hey." I stood there for a second. "Do you want to talk about last night?" He kept chopping. "Not really." I almost laughed again. Not because it was funny, just because it was absurd. "Okay." I took my shoes off, changed clothes, and left him alone. About 20 minutes later he came into the living room where I was folding laundry and said, "Are you seriously going to be like this?" I looked up at him holding one of his t-shirts. "Like what?" he said, distant. And I just blinked at him. "You just said you don't want to talk." He said, "I said not really. That doesn't mean act like a robot." I put the shirt down. "Noah, what exactly do you want from me right now?" He threw one hand up. "I want you to not make everything so extreme." At that point I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. I asked if you wanted to talk. You said no, so I backed off. Because you're pissed. I am pissed. Exactly. Because this is exhausting. That started the real fight. Not shouting, but fast, sharp voices over each other. He said I was being punitive. I said he was impossible to read. He said not every bad mood is a summit meeting. I said then maybe don't treat simple questions like a trap. He said I always escalate. I said I escalate because he says one thing and expects me to magically understand another. He told me I was twisting it. I said, "How? Tell me how. You said you didn't want to do this." So I stopped. Then you got mad because I stopped. He said, because you know me well enough to know that's not what I meant. And I said, no, I know you well enough to know that you want plausible deniability. That way if I keep trying, I'm overbearing, and if I stop, I'm cold. The second I said it, I knew it hit too hard. He went completely still. Then he said, very flat, wow. There's a certain tone that can make one word sound like a slammed door. That was the tone. I said, I'm not trying to be cruel. He laughed once without smiling. Could have fooled me. Then he picked up his keys and left. He didn't answer his phone for almost 3 hours. I called twice, texted once asking if he was okay, then sat on the couch with the cat pacing between my legs feeling sick. Not sick like I thought he'd gotten in an accident. Sick like I knew we'd crossed from regular couple friction into that awful territory where every sentence sounds like evidence. He finally came back around 10. He smelled like cold air and gas station coffee. He'd apparently driven around for hours because that's what he does when he's overwhelmed. He gets in the car and moves. No destination, just motion. I was sitting at the kitchen table. He took off his coat, hung it up, and didn't look at me. I said, quietly, I'm sorry for how I said that. He stood by the door. But not what you meant. I hesitated too long, which basically answered the question. He nodded once. Right. I said, I think there's truth in it, Noah. That doesn't mean I wanted to hurt you with it. He turned and looked at me then, and he just looked tired. Not angry anymore. Worse, almost. Just tired and guarded and older than 28 for a second. He said, do you have any idea how exhausting it is to feel like everything I say gets analyzed for hidden meaning? I stared at him because the irony was so intense it almost made me dizzy. I said, that is literally what I'm dealing with. He shook his head and went to bed without eating. We barely touched for the next 2 days. Not in a dramatic punishment way. More like we kept missing each other on purpose. He stayed late at work Thursday. I went to Talia's Friday after my shift and didn't come home until almost midnight. When I did, he was asleep on top of the covers with the TV still on low. Saturday we still had the brunch planned with Talia and her husband Marcus, plus 2 other friends, because it was Marcus's birthday weekend and I didn't want to be that person who cancels and makes everybody wonder. Noah almost bailed that morning, but then at the last minute he said, I'll go. Like he was volunteering for a dental extraction. Brunch was at this place in German Village that serves lavender lattes and eggs on tiny decorative plates. Everybody there was cheerful and rested, looking in a way I found offensive. Talia clocked the vibe between Noah and me immediately but didn't say anything. She just gave me one of those quick friend glances that means later. Noah can actually be incredibly charming in groups, which is part of what makes this kind of issue so isolating. He was funny, attentive, asked Marcus questions about his new job, talked basketball with Kevin, complimented Jenna's haircut. If you'd seen us there, you would have assumed we were fine. He even touched my knee under the table once when he was reaching for his coffee. That almost made it worse. Because I kept looking at him thinking, you can do all this. You can track 6 conversations, remember everyone's details, make people comfortable. But when I ask if something's wrong at home, suddenly words are impossible. After brunch, Talia texted asking if I wanted to walk with her for a minute before heading back. We left the guys settling the bill and did a slow lap around the block in the cold. She asked, bad? I said, bad in a boring way. She snorted, those are the worst kinds. I told her about the second fight, the whole plausible deniability comment, his driving around for hours. She winced at that part. Then she said, do you think he actually understands what you mean, or does he just hear criticism? Both probably. She shoved her hands deeper into her coat pockets. You know what it sounds like? What? He wants the emotional benefits of openness without actually participating in it. That line stayed with me. When we got home, Noah was quiet again. Not hostile, just kind of shut in. He cleaned the kitchen without being asked, vacuumed the living room, reorganized the hall closet, all his classic displacement activities. I sat on the couch pretending to answer emails and finally said, can I ask you something without this becoming a fight? He gave this tiny humorless smile. That depends. I almost gave up right there, but I didn't. I said, when you tell me you don't want to do this, what do you want me to do? He kept folding a reusable grocery bag in precise little squares. Just, not push. Okay. For how long? He frowned. I don't know. An hour? The whole evening? Until you bring it up? I don't know, Emma. I felt myself getting frustrated already. See, this is the problem. He dropped the bag on the table. No, the problem is you're trying to make this into a formula. Because I can't keep guessing. That came out louder than I meant it to. He went still. Then he said, maybe you don't have to guess. Maybe you could trust that if something matters, I'll say it. I actually laughed at that, and I know that didn't help, but it just came out. But you don't. His whole face closed. Wow. Okay. Noah, come on. You don't. Half the time I find out you were upset 3 days later. That doesn't mean I was lying. I didn't say lying. I said not saying it. He sat down across from me, and for the first time in days he actually looked directly at me. Not past me, not around me. Do you know what it feels like when you come at me with that tone? Like you've already decided something's wrong and now I have to produce an explanation that satisfies you. That was probably the most honest sentence he'd said all week. I said, more quietly, I don't think I come at you. He raised his eyebrows. I sighed. Okay, sometimes maybe I do. He nodded once, like that concession mattered. Then he said, it makes me shut down more. And because I was trying, I asked, so what would help instead? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Looked at the coffee table. Rubbed his thumb against the side of his index finger. I waited. Finally he said, I don't know. I let my head fall back against the couch cushion and just stared at the ceiling. That's what makes me feel crazy. He said, I'm not trying to make you feel crazy. I know, but you're also not making it easier. We sat there in silence for a minute. The cat jumped up next to me and kneaded the blanket like life was uncomplicated. Then Noah said, when I was growing up, if my dad asked what was wrong, it wasn't really a question. I looked at him. He kept staring ahead. It meant he'd already decided I had an attitude. So if I said nothing, I was lying. And if I said something, it became disrespect. That was new information. Not totally shocking, but new. Noah doesn't tell childhood stories unless they're funny or neutral. Nothing that reveals too much. I said, okay. He shrugged like he regretted saying it already. So when I hear that tone, I kind of just brace. I'm not your dad, I know, but, he pressed his lips together. It still feels bad. That deflated some of my anger, which honestly annoyed me too because I wanted to stay mad for at least one full evening. Instead I just felt sad and tired and kind of helpless. I said, I'm not trying to catch you doing something wrong. He nodded but didn't answer. Then I said, but I also can't be responsible for decoding the exact opposite of what you say. And there it was again. The central issue. He didn't argue with that. He just looked down. For a second I thought maybe we were getting somewhere. Not fixing it, but somewhere. Then his phone buzzed and he checked it, and whatever openness had appeared vanished instantly. Shoulders back up, face closed off. It was just his sister texting about some family dinner the next weekend, but still. Door shut. That dinner ended up becoming part of the bigger mess, actually. The following Sunday we drove out to his parents' house in Hilliard because Claire had just gotten engaged and Denise wanted everybody over. Noah and I were on speaking terms by then, but in that brittle, cautious way where you're both acting normal with too much effort. Denise made baked ziti. Claire showed off her ring 12 different ways under the dining room light. Ron talked for 20 straight minutes about traffic cameras. Typical family event. At some point Denise asked Noah if work had calmed down, and he said, not really, but it's fine. Then Claire laughed and said, translation. He's one inconvenience from driving into Lake Erie. Everybody laughed, even Ron, and Denise said, still smiling, you've always been like that. Bottled up until you pop. She meant it affectionately, I think. But I felt this weird jolt in my chest because there it was. Openly acknowledged by his whole family like it was his cute little quirk. Not a destructive communication pattern that was now actively causing problems in our relationship. Just classic Noah being Noah. Later, while Claire and Denise were in the kitchen looking at centerpiece photos on Pinterest, Ron was in the garage getting more beer, and I was helping clear plates. Denise said to me in that breezy mom voice, he's a good one, you know. He just needs space when he gets in a mood. I actually froze with 2 salad plates in my hand. She kept wiping down the counter like this was all very obvious. His father's the same way. I don't know what came over me, maybe weeks of frustration, but I said, space is fine. The issue is when he says one thing and means another and then gets upset if I don't guess correctly. Denise glanced at me, surprised. Oh, I immediately regretted saying anything. Sorry, I didn't mean to dump that on you. But she didn't brush it off. She lowered her voice and said, Noah hates feeling pushed. I said, I know. She gave me this sympathetic look that somehow made me feel worse. With men like that, sometimes it's easier to let them come around. Men like that, like it was a species issue. Weather management. Don't provoke, just wait and adapt. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, but that conversation sat in my body like a stone all the way home. In the car I was quieter than usual. Noah noticed after maybe 10 minutes and said, You okay? And I almost laughed at the cosmic joke of that. He can ask me that in a car, no problem. Simple, neutral, but at home if I ask him in the kitchen suddenly it's pressure. I said, Your mom talked to me. He tightened slightly. About what? About how you need space when you get in a mood. His hands adjusted on the steering wheel. That sounds like something she'd say. Do you agree with her? He stared at the road. Kind of. I turned to look at him. Do you think that's a workable long-term solution? I just wait around until you decide to re-enter the relationship? He got defensive immediately. That's not what I said. But that's what it feels like. He was quiet. Then he said, I think you make it worse when you chase. That stung because it was probably partly true. But it also made me furious because it turned the whole problem into my response rather than his behavior. I said, and I think you make it worse when you disappear. We didn't resolve anything that night either. The actual blow-up happened 3 days later, and this is the part that makes me wonder if maybe I really was too literal on purpose. He had another bad day. I could tell the second he walked in. Shoulders tight, dropped his bag harder than usual, barely said hi. I felt that familiar anxiety start up immediately, but this time I told myself no. Absolutely not. I am going to be respectful. I am going to take his words at face value. He microwaved leftovers, ate standing up, answered my normal conversation with yes, no, maybe, and then started wiping down the already clean counters with this aggressive focus. Finally I said, very gently, you seem stressed. Do you want company or do you want space? I was actually proud of that question because I thought it was clear and fair. He didn't even look at me. Space. So I said, okay. I grabbed my coat, my tote bag, my book, and my phone charger. He turned. What are you doing? Giving you space. Where are you going? Talia's. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Emma, it's 9 o'clock. Yes. You're leaving? You said you wanted space. He set the paper towel roll down on the counter. That doesn't mean leave the apartment. I honestly don't know if I was calm because I had reached enlightenment or because I was 1 inch from losing it. Then what does it mean? He ran a hand through his hair. Just, not this. Not questions. So being in the other room? Yes. Okay. Then say that. He said, you know what I meant. And something in me just snapped, not loud, not theatrical, just completely. Because there it was again. The whole burden handed back to me. You know what I meant. Always that. Always translating, softening, adjusting, interpreting. I said, no, I know what you said. He went silent. And because I was already there, coat half on, bag over my shoulder, I just left. Talia lives 15 minutes away with her husband and their baby daughter, who thankfully was already asleep. When I texted, can I come over for a little? She wrote back, yes, before I even made it out of the parking lot. She opened the door in pajama pants and 1 sock and took 1 look at my face and said, oh, it got worse. I cried in her kitchen while she made tea I didn't really want. Not dramatic sobbing, more that humiliating angry crying where you keep apologizing between sentences because you hate yourself for crying over something that sounds so stupid out loud. I said, I'm tired of being his emotional service animal. She choked on her tea a little and said, that is mean but not inaccurate. I sat at her table with my coat still on and told her the whole exchange. She listened, nodded, winced at the right parts, and finally said, if he says space and gets mad when you give space, that is not communication. That's control. That word scared me a little because Noah is not controlling in the classic sense. He's not jealous, not possessive, not monitoring me, not telling me what to wear or where to go. But there is something controlling about insisting that only his internal definition of words counts, while still expecting me to manage the emotional outcome. I stayed there almost 2 hours. Noah texted once. Are you seriously staying there? I stared at that message so long Talia finally said, do not answer from your anger. So I wrote, you said you wanted space. I'm giving it to you. He didn't reply. When I got home a little after 11, the apartment was dark except for the stove light. He was sitting on the couch, not watching the TV. Just sitting there. He looked up when I came in. I put my bag down slowly because the room felt like static. He said, you made your point. And that immediately made me want to leave again. I said, it wasn't a point. It was what you asked for. He stood up. No, it wasn't. It was you trying to punish me. I laughed, short and bitter. By leaving you alone? That's punishment? You know that's not what I meant. There it was. The line. The trigger. The curse. I said, louder than I meant to. Then stop saying things you don't mean. He shouted back, stop acting like everything is a contract. That was the first time either of us had actually yelled in this whole mess. We both went quiet right after. It was almost eerie, like even we were surprised by the sound of it. Then he said, quieter, do you actually think I don't care if you leave? I stared at him. Noah, do you hear yourself? You tell me you want space, and then I'm supposed to prove I care by not giving it to you too literally? He looked away, jaw tight. I said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being wrong no matter which option I pick. He sat back down hard, elbows on his knees. I didn't want you gone. Then say that. He covered his face with one hand. I don't know how to say it right. That took all the wind out of me. I sank down into the armchair across from him and suddenly we both just looked exhausted. Not enemy exhausted, just human exhausted. After a minute I said, do you know what this feels like from my side? He nodded slightly against his hand. Probably not good. I almost smiled at that because it was such a Noah answer. Understated to the point of absurdity. I said, it feels like I'm dating a locked door that sometimes loves me back. He looked up at me then. Really looked, and I could tell that one hurt in a deeper way than the plausible deniability comment, because it was sadder and truer. He asked, do you want to break up? And my stomach dropped because that was not where I was trying to go, but I suddenly realized maybe that's where he thought all conflict went. To abandonment, to the end. That would explain some things too, honestly. I said, I want this to stop happening. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling. I don't know how. I said, therapy. He laughed once with no humor. Of course. And that made me mad again. Why do you say it like that? Because that's your answer for everything. No, my answer for repeated unresolved problems is therapy. That's normal. He shook his head, talking to some stranger about how I phrase things. Yes. About why basic emotional communication feels like a threat to you. Silence. Then he said, very quietly, because it does. That was the first moment I really understood that underneath all the frustration, he wasn't withholding to be difficult. He was bracing constantly, protecting something, maybe stupidly, maybe destructively, but not casually. I said, softer, I know. And I did know. That was the worst part. I knew and I was still furious because understanding the wound doesn't make the impact go away. We talked for almost an hour after that. Not smoothly. A lot of stops and starts. A lot of, that's not what I meant, and me saying, okay, then help me understand. More honesty than usual, but still uneven. He admitted that when he says he wants space, what he often means is he wants the pressure to stop, but not the connection. He wants me near, just not probing. He wants to feel like I'm not angry at him for being off. He wants time without feeling abandoned. I told him that from my side, being told, I'm fine, when he's obviously not fine makes me feel shut out and stupid. That, can we not do this, sounds dismissive and rejecting, not vulnerable. That I don't mind giving space if I actually know what that means, but I can't read subtext forever and call it intimacy. He listened better than usual, I'll give him that. At one point I said, if you need an hour, say that. If you want to sit on the couch quietly together, say that. If you don't know what you need, say that. But you can't hand me a riddle and then blame me for the answer. He actually nodded. Then he said, when you left tonight, I felt like you were proving you could. I frowned. Could what? Leave. That one sat between us for a second. And because honesty apparently breeds more honesty once it finally starts, I said, part of me was. He swallowed hard and looked away. I said, not because I wanted to punish you. Because I needed you to see what your words actually do. He was quiet for a long time after that. We ended up sleeping in the same bed that night, but sort of carefully. Not tense exactly, just tentative. At some point in the dark he reached for my hand under the blanket and held it without saying anything, which in Noah language was basically a speech. Things have been better since then, not magically fixed, just better in a way that feels fragile and real. He did actually look up therapists. I nearly fainted from shock when he sent me a screenshot of 2 names his insurance covers. We've also started trying this stupidly simple thing where if he's off, he'll say either, "I'm stressed but not ready to talk," or, "I'm not upset with you, I just need to decompress." Which, apparently, was available to him the whole time. And I'm trying too. I'm trying not to pounce the minute I feel distance. I'm trying to ask once and then trust. I'm trying not to hear every quiet mood as danger. But I still keep coming back to that moment with my coat on, bag over my shoulder, him saying space and me taking it literally. Because I honestly don't think I was wrong. Maybe I was a little fed up, maybe there was some edge to it, maybe part of me wanted the absurdity of it exposed. Fine, I can own that, but I also think if your relationship only functions when one person constantly translates the other person's words into a softer private language, eventually somebody is going to get tired and just start taking the words as written. And apparently that somebody was me. Story 7. I cheated on my husband and don't know how to feel. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who makes a post like this. I've read enough Reddit stories over the years, lying in bed next to Mark while he slept, scrolling through confessions and dramas thinking, wow, people really live like that. And now here I am, typing this at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, sitting on the closed lid of our toilet because it's the only room in the house with a lock. My name is Lauren, I'm 34. Mark is 37. We've been married for 8 years, together for 11. No kids, just a golden retriever named Gus who currently has no idea that his human mom is having a full-blown identity crisis on the 2nd floor. I should probably just say it. Last night, I slept with someone else. A guy named Ethan. I met him at a work conference in Portland. I was there for 3 days for a marketing summit, and he was presenting for a partner company. Tall, messy dark hair, that kind of easy smile that makes you feel like you're the funniest person in the room even when you're just making small talk about bad hotel coffee. Nothing happened the first night. We just ended up sitting next to each other at the opening dinner, and we talked. Really talked. About how corporate jargon is slowly killing our souls, about the best hiking trails in the Columbia River Gorge, about his divorce 2 years ago and how he's still not sure he believes in marriage. I told him about Mark. About how my husband is a good man, a kind man, the kind of man who remembers to buy my favorite brand of almond milk without being asked. I didn't tell Ethan the other stuff. The stuff I don't even admit to myself most days. The second night, there was a cocktail hour. I had 2 glasses of wine, then a third. Ethan found me standing by the window on the 12th floor, looking out at the city lights, and he asked me if I was okay. And I don't know what happened. I just started talking. I told him that I love Mark, I really do, but that love has felt less like a choice and more like an obligation for a long time. I told him that Mark and I haven't had sex in almost 9 months. That he comes home from work, eats dinner in front of the TV, and falls asleep on the couch by 9:30. That when I try to talk to him about it, he just says he's tired, or stressed, or that I'm overthinking things. I told Ethan that sometimes I feel like I'm living with a ghost. Someone who's technically present but not really there. He didn't try to kiss me after I said all that. He just listened, and then he said, "That sounds really lonely, Lauren." And I cried, right there in the conference center hallway, in front of a potted plant and a man I'd known for less than 48 hours. I cried because he was right. I am lonely. I've been lonely for years. The thing about loneliness inside a marriage is that it's a special kind of shameful. Because you're not supposed to be lonely when you have a partner. If you're lonely, it must be your fault, right? You're not trying hard enough, not communicating enough, not being grateful enough for what you have. So you just swallow it and keep going. I didn't plan for anything to happen. But after I stopped crying, Ethan walked me back to my room. And at the door, I was the one who kissed him. Me. I leaned in. He hesitated for a second, just long enough for me to feel a flash of humiliation, and then he kissed me back. One thing led to another. That's the phrase people use, isn't it? One thing led to another. As if it's just physics, Just a chain of events with no one really making a choice. But I made choices. I chose to invite him in. I chose to take off my own sweater. I chose to let him undo my jeans. I remember every single choice, and I remember the feeling of not caring. That's the part that scares me the most. Not that I did it, but that for a few hours, I genuinely did not care about the consequences. The sex was good, not earth-shattering, not the kind of thing they write songs about, but good. What I really remember is afterward, lying in the dark, Ethan's arm across my stomach, and feeling something I haven't felt in years. Scene. Like for that one night, I was a person again, not just Mark's wife or a marketing manager or someone's daughter. Just me. I left his room at 5 a.m., before the housekeeping staff started their rounds. Flew home yesterday afternoon. Mark picked me up from the airport. He hugged me and said he missed me, and I hugged him back and smelled his laundry detergent and his deodorant and the faint smell of the burgers he'd grilled for himself while I was gone. And I thought, this man has no idea. He has absolutely no idea that I am not the same person who left 3 days ago. Last night, we had dinner together. He asked how the conference was. I said fine. He asked if I learned anything useful. I said yeah, a few things. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He never does. He put his plate in the sink, kissed the top of my head, and went to watch highlights from the game. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour just staring at the wall. Here's the part one don't know how to feel about. I expected to feel guilt. Crushing, suffocating, can't breathe guilt. And I do feel something. But it's not guilt, it's more like resentment. And I know how awful that sounds. I cheated on my husband, and I'm sitting here resenting him for making me feel like I had to. Is that insane? Tell me if that's insane. Because here's the truth I've been dancing around for probably 4 or 5 years. Mark is a passive person. He always has been, but when we first got together, I mistook it for steadiness. He wasn't jealous or controlling. He was easygoing. He didn't need constant reassurance. He was fine with me going out with friends, fine with me taking trips, fine with me pursuing my hobbies. And I loved that about him. My ex before Mark was the opposite, anxious, possessive, always needing to know where I was. So Mark felt like a breath of fresh air. But somewhere along the way, easygoing became absent. Fine with everything became fine with nothing. He doesn't get excited about things. He doesn't get angry about things. He just exists. He goes to work, comes home, watches TV, goes to bed. On weekends, he mows the lawn and does the grocery shopping and maybe watches a movie with me if I pick it out. But he never initiates. He never plans a date night. He never surprises me. He never looks at me across the dinner table and asks me what I'm thinking about. I've tried to talk to him about this. More times than I can count. I've used every approach I can think of. I've been gentle. I've been direct. I've cried. I've yelled. I've written letters. I've suggested couples counseling. He always agrees with me. That's the crazy part. He'll nod and say, "You're right. I've been distant. I'll try harder." And then nothing changes. Or it changes for a week, and then it's back to the same routine. At some point, trying feels more humiliating than just accepting it. So I stopped trying. I stopped initiating sex because the rejection, even the polite, tired, "Not tonight, babe," rejection, was wearing me down. I stopped suggesting date nights because he'd just say, "Sure, whatever you want to do," and somehow that felt worse than a no. I stopped sharing things with him because he'd listen but he wouldn't really hear. And I told myself this was fine. This was marriage. This was what it meant to be an adult, to be steady, to be loyal. You don't throw away a good man just because he's boring. He doesn't hit you. He doesn't cheat. He has a stable job. He's not mean to your family. You stay. But I think I checked out a long time ago. Way before Ethan. And that's the part I'm really wrestling with. I don't think I cheated because I was drunk or because Ethan was charming or because I was away from home. I think I cheated because I've been starving for years, and when someone finally offered me a meal, I didn't have the strength to say no anymore. That doesn't make it right. I know it doesn't. I'm not sitting here trying to justify myself. I did a bad thing. I broke a vow. I lied to someone who trusts me. If Mark found out, he would be devastated. And he would have every right to be. But here's the question I can't stop turning over in my head. Am I supposed to feel bad about something that woke me up? Because that's what last night did. It woke me up. For the first time in years, I felt something real. Not comfortable, not stable, not fine, but alive. And now I'm back in my quiet house with my quiet husband and my quiet life, and I don't know how to go back to sleep. Ethan texted me this morning. Just a simple, hope you got home safe. I had a really nice time with you. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to throw my whole life away for the possibility of feeling seen again. And part of me thinks that's the most pathetic thing I've ever admitted. I told my sister tonight. Well, I told half of it. I told her I was feeling really disconnected from Mark and I didn't know what to do. She's 2 years older than me, her name is Jenna, and she's always been the practical one. She said, Lauren, you knew who Mark was when you married him. He's not suddenly a different person. You're just realizing what you actually need. And I think she's right. I think I married Mark because he was safe. Because he would never hurt me the way my ex did. Because he would never leave. And now I'm realizing that safe isn't the same as happy. And I don't know if I can spend the rest of my life just being safe. But I also don't know if I have the right to leave. That sounds stupid when I say it out loud. Of course I have the right to leave. People leave marriages every day. But Mark hasn't done anything wrong. He's not a bad husband. He's just absent. And is that enough of a reason? Is I'm lonely a good enough reason to blow up someone's life? I keep thinking about what would happen if I told him. Not just about Ethan, but about all of it. About how unhappy I've been. About how I feel like I'm disappearing inside our marriage. I imagine him looking at me with that calm, unbothered face of his, and I imagine him saying, okay, if that's what you want. And somehow, that would hurt more than if he screamed at me. Because it would just prove that he never really cared enough to fight for me in the first place. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to tell him. I don't know if I'm going to see Ethan again. I don't know if I'm going to pack a bag tomorrow or pretend this never happened and keep going like I have been for the last 5 years. What I do know is that I'm sitting on my toilet at 2 in the morning, typing this out for strangers on the internet, because I don't have anyone in real life I can say this to. And that probably tells you everything you need to know. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. I don't know if I'm looking for advice or judgment or just someone to witness this. Maybe all of the above. Or maybe I just needed to say it out loud, even if it's just into the void. I cheated on my husband. And I don't know how to feel about it. But I think the worst part is that I don't feel nearly as bad as I probably should.